Ethan opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. A white ceiling with a lightning-shaped crack. He recognized that crack. He used to look at it every morning 7 years ago. His heart pounded so hard that he clutched his chest and sat up in bed. His hands were smooth, no scars, no burn mark from Nidra's acid on his left wrist, no calluses from 1,000 raids. He raised his palms to his face and wiggled his fingers. 20-year-old fingers, slender, weak, alive. His phone lay on the nightstand. The screen read 6:47 a.m. October 14th. He read the date 3 times, then again, October 14th. Convergence Day, the day the world of Arkvel burst into reality and changed the planet forever. 4 hours remained until he could log into the game. 16 hours remained until Update 2.0, which would transform the virtual world into a real dimension. Ethan put his phone down and looked out the window. In San Jose, his old one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor, the parking lot below. A gray sky, an ordinary morning on an ordinary day in a world that didn't yet know that in a few hours everything would change. But Ethan knew. He remembered every second of the next 10 years. He remembered the coordinates of every hidden dungeon. He remembered the attack timings of hundreds of bosses. He remembered who would betray him and who would die. He remembered how Kaiser Lee would give the order and then not even turn around. He remembered how he would die at the age of 37, covering the retreat of a man who didn't know his name. Ethan got out of bed. His legs felt like cotton. He made his way to the bathroom and turned on the faucet. Ice-cold water hit his face. He lifted his head and looked at his reflection in the mirror, a young face. Dark circles under his eyes from night shifts at the office, sunken cheeks, the gaze of a junior programmer who earned $40,000 a year and dreamed of buying a car someday. But in the eyes of this 20-year-old guy, something was burning that hadn't been there before. 10 years of war, 10 years of death, 10 years of knowledge that no one wanted to hear. Ethan smiled at his reflection. For the first time in 10 years, it was a genuine smile. He went back into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. He had to think fast. In 4 hours, Arkvel's servers would open to the first wave of players. Millions of people around the world would log into the virtual world thinking it was just a game. In 16 hours, Update 2.0 would turn this world into physical reality. Death in the game would become death on Earth, and no one but Ethan knew what would happen next. He knew that in 2 years, the anomaly would come to Arkvel, a system error that would begin devouring player classes and erasing people from reality. He knew that over the next 10 years, hundreds of thousands of hunters would perish. He knew that the world's best guilds would be powerless. But right now, he had an advantage that no one else on the planet possessed. He knew where the altar of the first pact was located, a hidden class, the only one in the game. The one you can't select when creating a character, the one that no one had found in their previous life. The coordinates were leaked on the forum only in the 5th year, long after the altar had become inactive. But now there were only a few hours left until activation. Ethan took out his phone and opened the map. Jeju Island, a flooded cave on the southern coast. That was exactly where the altar of the first pact stood, waiting for the one who would speak the right words. The problem was the distance. Ethan was in San Jose. Jeju was on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, but that didn't matter. The teleportation to Arkvel worked from anywhere in the world. Something else was important. After teleportation, the starting location was randomly selected from 6 zones. Ethan remembered that in his past life, he'd ended up in the Valley of Beginnings, and he remembered how to get from there to the cave in 2 hours. If you knew the shortcut through Gray Canyon, a path that wouldn't be discovered for another 6 months. He stood up and began to get ready. He grabbed his backpack. He tossed a bottle of water and an energy bar inside. Then he paused. He looked at the kitchen knife in its holder, a cheap $12 knife from a home goods store. In his past life, he'd entered Arkvale empty-handed. Now he walked over to the stand and pulled out the knife. The blade was dull, the handle was plastic. This knife couldn't even kill a starter boar with a single strike. But Ethan didn't need to kill anything. He just had to wait. At 11 a.m. Server time, the Crimson Wolf Fen, a level 15 training boss. In a past life, 5 guilds would kill him in 2 minutes and receive a useless dagger. No one knew that Fenrir was the cub of the Ice Tyrant Grimwolf, a level 90 from the final patch. No one knew that if you said the right phrase instead of attacking, Fenrir would undergo a transformation and become an adult overnight. Ethan knew. He put the knife in his backpack and looked at his watch. 7:15 a.m. There were 3.5 hours left until the servers went live. He sat down on the floor, crossed his legs, and closed his eyes. 10 years' worth of information flooded his mind. Names, dates, coordinates, timings, boss weak points, locations of hidden quests, guild raid schedules, political intrigues between governments. All of this lived in his head like a massive database he'd spent 10 years compiling at the cost of his own life. In his past life, he'd been a cannon fodder, a second-line debuffer, the guy who died first so the boss's rage timer would drop. His knowledge was priceless, but he himself went unnoticed. No one listens to Juna. That was the unspoken rule of every guild. It doesn't matter how much you know. What matters is your rank. Ethan opened his eyes. This time would be different. He wouldn't beg to join someone else's guild. He wouldn't bring Kaiserly his coffee. He wouldn't be the first to die so that someone else could claim the glory. This time, he would take what no guild in the world had been able to get their hands on. At 10:30, Ethan lay down on his bed and closed his eyes. His phone displayed the countdown on the Arkvale website. 30 minutes until the servers opened. All over the world, millions of people were getting ready to log in. Forums were buzzing with anticipation. Streamers were turning on their cameras. Guilds were holding their final meetings. The world's top 100 clans had already assigned roles and routes for an effective start. Everyone had a plan. None of those plans accounted for the man in a one-bedroom apartment in San Jose. The timer hit 0. The world flickered. Ethan felt his body become weightless. The familiar sensation of teleportation. He'd gone through this once before, 10 years ago, and remembered every detail. The cold, then the heat, then the smell of grass and earth. He opened his eyes. Above him was the blue sky of Arkvale, bright, bottomless with 2 suns. Below him was grass, green and soft. Trees with silvery bark stood all around. The Valley of Beginnings, the same starting zone as in his past life. Ethan stood up and looked around. Other players were appearing all around him. Dozens, hundreds, they materialized out of thin air, their faces a mix of delight and confusion. Many immediately opened their system windows. They checked their stats. They shouted with joy. Some were already running toward the nearest monsters. A group of 5 people in matching uniforms headed north. Organized, precise, a guild. Ethan didn't waste time looking around. He knew this area like the back of his hand. Every rock, every tree, every trail. He turned southwest and ran, while everyone else headed toward the nearest NPCs for their starting quests. Ethan ran in the opposite direction, across a field of low-level boars, past a stream with crystal clear water, toward the entrance to Gray Canyon, a narrow passage between 2 cliffs overgrown with moss. In his past life, they discovered this passage 6 months later by accident. A scout had gotten lost and found it while fleeing from a bear. Ethan squeezed through the crevice and ran down the canyon. Dark, it was damp. Water sloshed beneath his feet. The walls were closing in. An ordinary player would have turned back. Ethan kept running. 20 minutes later, the canyon led him to the coast. The gray sea stretched to the horizon. Waves crashed against the cliffs, and right beneath the cliff, at water level, he could see the entrance to a flooded cave. Ethan climbed down the wet rocks, clinging to the ledges. The cold water reached his knees, then his waist. He entered the cave. It was dark inside, only a faint glow ahead, blue, pulsating like a heartbeat. He waded chest-deep in the water for 10 minutes until he reached the source of the light, the altar of the first pact, a stone slab on a pedestal covered with runes that glowed blue. Small fish swam around it, glowing as well. It was quiet, only the sound of dripping water. Ethan stood before the altar and placed his hand on the stone. The runes flared to life. A system window appeared before his eyes. Hidden quest discovered. The one who speaks to the vanquished. Condition. Prove that you can hear those whom the world has turned away from. Ethan read the text and nodded. He knew what would happen next. The quest required him to answer the altar's 3 questions. In his past life, the coordinates and questions had been posted on a forum, but by that time the altar had already gone dark. The first question appeared in the system window. What makes a monster a monster? Ethan answered without hesitation, not fangs or claws. A monster is made by the one who calls it a monster. The runes pulsed faster. The second question. What will you do with the vanquished? Ethan replied. I'll ask for his name. The third question. Are you ready to bear their pain? Ethan looked at his hands, the thin hands of a 20-year-old man, hands that in his past life had held a shield behind others' backs for 10 years. He replied, I bore someone else's pain for 10 years. One more life won't change anything. The altar flared. The water around it rose and swirled. The runes broke free from the stone and seeped into Ethan's skin. A system message filled his entire field of vision. Hidden class acquired. Monster Lord. Rank, the 1. Description, one who forges a pact with the vanquished and leads them not as a master, but as an equal. Ethan closed the system window. His hands were trembling, not from the cold, but because in his past life he had dreamed of this moment for 10 years and had never even come close to it. He turned and trudged toward the cave's exit. Ahead of him lay the return journey through the canyon, and then the Valley of Beginnings, and then 11 a.m. and the appearance of Fenra, the Crimson Wolf. Ethan had a $12 knife in the only class in the world. That was enough. He stepped out of the water onto the shore and looked at the 2 sons of Arkvel. In this life, he wouldn't be a disposable pawn. In this life, he would be the one the monsters would call their own. Ethan ran back through Gray Canyon. Water sloshed under his feet. His wet clothes clung to his body. The system window with the class description hung at the edge of his vision, but he didn't open it. Not now. Every minute counted. The server clock read 10:38. There were 22 minutes until Fenra's arrival. The canyon seemed longer on the way back, or maybe his legs were just tired. 20-year-old Ethan's body was weak. No leveled up stats, no gear. Level 1, base stats. He was weaker than any starting boar in the field. In his past life, he'd been accustomed to the body of a with hundreds of battles under his belt. Now he was gasping for breath from a simple run. Ethan burst out of the canyon onto the field and stopped to catch his breath. The Valley of Beginnings was teeming with life. During the 2 hours he'd spent in the cave, the starting zone had filled with thousands of players. System effects flashed everywhere. Some were already hunting boars. Others were gathering herbs. A group of 10 was taking on a mini-boss on the hill. Ethan recognized the emblem on their shoulders, a golden crown on a silver background. The Silver Crown Guild, his former guild, his future enemies. He turned away and ran towards the southern clearing. That was exactly where Fenra would appear at 11 o'clock. He remembered it clearly. In his past life, he'd stood in the crowd of onlookers when 5 Silver Crown raiders killed a wolf in 120 seconds. Guildmaster Kaiser Lee had personally picked up the loot. A useless dagger. Everyone was congratulating each other. Ethan stood in the back rows and clapped along with everyone else. The southern clearing was empty. Tall grass up to his waist. 3 boulders at the edges. An old tree with a broken-off top in the center. Ethan walked over to the tree and sat down on the ground, leaning his back against the trunk. He took a bottle of water out of his backpack and took a sip. His hands were still shaking. He opened the system window and finally studied his class. Monster Lord. Rank 1. Primary ability. Pact of Subjugation. Condition. Reduce the target's HP to below 5% and impose the Pact's seal. The target retains all abilities, memory, and personality. Maximum active pacts. 1. Additional slots are unlocked through unique trials. Passive ability. Reverse experience. The bearer gains a portion of the experience from the growth of their subordinates. Passive ability. Tactics library. The bearer can see the attack patterns of any monster encountered. Also activates for creatures from the bearer's memory, connection, pact resonance. Subordinates sense the wearer's emotions. In the event of a threat to the wearer, an immediate response is triggered. Restriction. The class does not provide direct combat stats. The wearer receives no bonuses to magic power, defense, or speed. Ethan closed the window. Everything matched what he knew from the forums of his past life. The class wasn't designed for a fighter, it was designed for someone who knows how to see. The system clock read 10:56, 4 minutes. Ethan stood up and pulled a knife from his backpack, a cheap kitchen knife with a plastic handle. In the Arcful system, it was listed as an unclassified weapon. Damage 3, durability 15 out of 100. By comparison, the starter wooden sword awarded for the first quest dealt 12 damage. Ethan gripped the handle and looked at the blade. This knife wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to be the final blow after Fenra decided to surrender on his own. The air above the clearing rippled. A system alert was sent to all players within a kilometer radius. Attention! The field boss, Fenra the Crimson Wolf, will appear in 60 seconds in the South Glade sector. Recommended level 10, recommended party size 5 players. Ethan heard voices rustling behind him. Players were running toward the glade. He turned around. 3 groups were already forming a battle formation at the northern edge. Among them, he spotted the familiar golden uniform of Silver Crown. 5 fighters, a swordsman in front, 2 archers on either side, a mage and a healer in the back. The classic 5-man party for a field boss. They moved in unison. Professionally, they'd come to kill. Ethan had to get there first. He stepped out into the center of the clearing, alone, without a party. Level 1, with a $12 knife. One of the players behind him laughed. Someone shouted for him to back off before he got killed. Ethan didn't turn around. The ground shook, the air grew heavy, the grass in the clearing lay flat as if blown by the wind. Out of nowhere, right in front of Ethan, Fenra the Crimson Wolf materialized. He was the size of a horse, dark red fur, yellow eyes with vertical pupils, fangs as long as a forearm. Steam rose from its mouth, a red HP bar and a caption hovered above its head. Fenra the Crimson Wolf. Level 15, Field Boss. Fenra bared its teeth and growled. The sound traveled through Ethan's body like a vibration. The players behind him began preparing their attacks. Ethan heard the clang of swords and the clicks of spells. In a few seconds, they would strike. Ethan took a step forward. He tucked the knife behind his back. He looked the wolf straight in the eyes, and he spoke words that no player in this world had ever heard before. Your mother is waiting for you beyond the northern wind. Fenra froze. His growl cut short. His yellow eyes widened. The wolf took a step back, then another. His HP bar flickered. A new text appeared above Fenra's head that only Ethan could see. Hidden quest activated. Escort home. Objective. Lead Fenra to the northern pass before the first sunset. Condition: Fenra must not take damage from other players. The Silver Crown players were already running toward the clearing. The swordsman raised his blade. Fenra was 30 meters away. Ethan turned to the wolf. We need to go, right now. Fenra looked at him. There was no aggression in those yellow eyes. There was something else. Confusion, hope, fear. The horse-sized wolf stood before the level 1 human wielding a kitchen knife and didn't move. Because this man knew his mother's name, Ethan ran north. 3 seconds later, Fenra ran after him. The silver-crowned swordsman lowered his blade and stopped in the middle of an empty clearing. The boss had vanished. The players exchanged glances. Someone asked what had happened. No one knew the answer. At the edge of the clearing, one streamer accidentally captured a frame. The silhouette of a guy in wet clothes running alongside a huge red wolf. In an hour, this frame would appear in the global chat. In 2 hours, 100,000 people would see it. In a day, it would become the first mystery of the new world. But right now, Ethan was just running. Fenra was running beside him. The wolf was faster, much faster. But he didn't pull ahead. He matched the man's pace. They ran north, past forests and fields, past groups of players who scattered in terror at the sight of the field boss, past NPCs who fell to their knees. The tactics library was already up and running. Out of the corner of his eye, Ethan saw a system window displaying Fenra's data. All attack patterns, weak points, speed, radius, and a small note he remembered from his past life. Hidden trait, the cub of the ice tyrant Grimwolf. Current form, juvenile. Growth potential, limitless. They ran for 2 hours. Ethan was exhausted after the first hour, but kept going. Fenra waited. When Ethan stumbled, the wolf offered his side. When Ethan stopped to catch his breath, Fenra lay down beside him and looked at him with yellow eyes. Not as if he were looking at his master. More like he was looking at a strange person who knew something he couldn't possibly know. The northern pass opened up before them by evening, a stone arch between 2 cliffs. Beyond it blew a cold wind, carrying the scent of snow and pine needles. Fenra stopped in front of the arch. He raised his head. He howled. The sound was thin and high-pitched. Not the battle roar of an alpha, the cry of a pup calling for its mother. The wind behind the arch grew stronger. A reply could be heard in it, low, distant. Fenra darted forward and disappeared behind the arch. Ethan stood and waited. A minute passed. 2, 5. The wind died down. Fenra emerged from behind the archway. But this wasn't the same Fenra. The wolf had doubled in size. His fur had changed from dark red to silvery white with crimson stripes. His eyes had turned from yellow to icy blue. A chill emanated from his body. The system window updated. Fenra. Heir to Grimwolf, level 90, world class, transformation complete. A wolf the size of a bus stood before Ethan, looking down at him. Steam rose from its nostrils. With every exhale, the grass around it was covered in frost. Ethan looked at him, the gaze of a level 1 human meeting the eyes of a level 90 creature. He raised his hand, knife in hand. Fenra lowered his head. He flattened his ears and nudged Ethan's palm with his nose. A cold, wet nose the size of a fist. Fenra's HP bar flickered and began to drop, on its own, without an attack, without damage. The wolf was surrendering voluntarily. 5%, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ethan placed the knife on the ground. He pressed his palm against Fenra's forehead. The pact seal. Runes flared on his hand and flowed onto the wolf's fur. System message. Pact sealed. Fenra, heir of Grimwolf, has become your first subordinate. All abilities, memories, and personality traits have been preserved. Pact slot 1 of 1. Next slot, complete a unique trial. Ethan withdrew his hand. Fenra raised his head. Ethan woke up from the cold. He was lying on the frozen grass, pressed against Fenra's side. The wolf slept, curled up in a ring around him. His fur was covered in frost. Every breath Fenra exhaled turned into a cloud of... The system clock read 5:12 a.m. The second day in Arkvale. An update had occurred overnight. Ethan could feel it even in his sleep. The world had become denser. Smells had become sharper. The pain from his stiff back was real, not just part of the game. Update 2.0 had taken effect. Arkvale was now reality. Ethan sat up and opened the system window. A global announcement was displayed above all other messages. Attention all players. Update 2.0 has been activated. Changes, full tactile perception activated. Pain threshold set to a realistic level. Resurrection system disabled. Character death is irreversible. Return to Earth is possible only through exit points. New dungeons and world events will open on schedule. Ethan closed the window. He knew every word of that announcement. He remembered the panic that gripped millions of players when they realized they were trapped. That death was real, that they could return home, but any raid could be their last. In his past life, 2,000 people died in the first 3 days after the update. Most died of panic. They fled toward the exit points through territories inhabited by high-level monsters. They didn't know the routes. Ethan remembered their faces on the memorial wall that was built a year later. Fenra opened his eyes. The blue light of his pupils reflected off the frost all around. He raised his head and looked at Ethan, a voice in his head. "You weren't asleep. I woke up twice and you were staring into the darkness." Ethan shrugged. "Just a habit." Fenra stood up. The ground shook under his weight. A wolf the size of a bus stretched like a house dog. Front paws forward, back arched, tail up. The sight was absurd. A level 90 world boss was doing his morning stretches. Ethan pulled an energy bar out of his backpack. The last one. He broke it in half. He held out a half to Fenra. The wolf looked at the piece of energy bar, which was about the size of his fingernail, then at Ethan, then back at the energy bar. "I eat reindeer," he said, "and bison and sometimes bears, polar bears. That's all I have," Ethan replied. Fenra tilted his head. He carefully picked up the bar with the tips of his fangs, chewed it, swallowed it, said one word, "Sweet." Ethan grinned and bit into his half. They had to keep moving. The plan for the second day was simple, but tight on time. First, find a safe place to spend the night. The abandoned temple on Upper Peak. Ethan knew its coordinates. In his past life, it had taken 3 months to discover the temple. A hidden location in the mountains with natural defenses, and an NPC guardian who gave unique quests. The perfect base. Second, begin preparations for the second pact. In 5 days, Liluweir would appear in the Blood Cathedral dungeon, a demoness swordswoman. In his past life, a raid of 20 players had killed her on the 7th day. Ethan had to arrive a day earlier. Third, don't draw attention. The last point was the most difficult, because walking beside Ethan was a wolf that dwarfed the trees. Fenra was enormous. His silvery white fur with crimson stripes glowed in the sun. The ground cracked beneath his paws. The air around him was 10 degrees colder. Every player within a radius of 100 meters received a system warning. Attention, a world-class creature has been detected. Avoid contact. Ethan walked east along a forest trail. Fenra walked beside him. The trees parted before the wolf, literally. The silvery trunks parted to the sides as if blown by the wind when Fenra passed by. 3 times they encountered groups of players. Each time, the reaction was the same. First, a scream, then a run. Then system messages in the global chat. Saw a world boss in the eastern forest. A huge white wolf, level undetermined. A human is next to it. I repeat, a human is walking next to it. Ethan read the chat and shook his head. By evening, the whole server will know. We needed to get to the temple faster. Fenra, can you carry me? The wolf turned its head. I am the heir to Grimwolf. My lineage has ruled the northern mountains for 3,000 years. We were never pack animals. Pause. Though I'll make an exception for you. Ethan climbed onto Fenra's back. The fur was thick and stiff as wire. The cold seeped through his clothes. But when Fenra took off running, Ethan forgot about the cold. The world turned into blurred streaks of green and blue. The speed was insane. Trees flashed by like poles outside a train window. The wind cut into his face. Ethan clung to the fur and pressed himself against the wolf's neck. Fenra ran without regard the path, through the forest, across the field, over the river, which he leaped across in a single bound. He climbed the mountainside as if it were a flat road. In 2 hours, they covered a distance that would have taken 2 days on foot. Upper Peak came into view as the sun set. The mountain stood apart from the main range, covered in forest at its base and bare rock at its summit. Halfway up the slope, among the rocks, the roofs of an abandoned temple were visible among the rocks halfway up the slope. Red roof tiles, stone walls, columns entwined with ivy. Ethan slid off Fenra's back and walked toward the temple. Fenra followed him. Halfway there, the wolf stopped. It was too narrow. The passage between the rocks was designed for people, not for creatures the size of a bus. Ethan turned around. Wait here, I'll check it out. Fenra laid down on the rocks. He rested his head on his paws. I'll wait, but if you're not back in an hour, I'll go through these rocks, right through them, not between them. Ethan nodded and squeezed through the passage. 10 meters further on, the narrow corridor led to a plaza in front of the temple. The courtyard was paved with stone slabs. A fountain stood in the center, dry. 3 buildings surrounded the courtyard: the main hall, the residential wing, and the smithy. Everything was abandoned. Dust, cobwebs, moss on the walls. But the structure was solid. The roof was intact. The walls were thick, a perfect base. Ethan stepped into the courtyard. A system message popped up. Hidden location detected. Temple of Upper Peak. Status: neutral territory. Monsters cannot enter without the owner's invitation. Temple Guardian inactive. Awakening ritual required. Ethan looked around. In his past life, a group of scouts had found the temple 3 months after the convergence. They had awakened the Guardian and gained access to unique quests for upgrading their gear, but they'd had to share the temple with 2 other guilds. Now, Ethan was the first and the only one. He walked through the courtyard to the main hall. He pushed open the heavy door. Inside it was dark and smelled musty. A cloud of dust swirled up. When his eyes adjusted, Ethan saw a large hall with columns. In the center was a stone platform. On it stood a statue, a woman in armor with a sword pointed toward the ceiling. The temple's guardian. Ethan knew the awakening ritual. He had to place an object with a soul on the platform, any object that its owner truly cherished. He looked at his empty hands. His backpack was empty. His water bottle was empty. He'd eaten the energy bar, a $12 knife. Ethan pulled out the knife. He looked at the blunt blade, the plastic handle, 3 damage points. This knife was useless in combat, but with this knife he'd made it through Gray Canyon. He had stood before Fenroy with this knife. He'd had this knife with him when he made his first pact. Did he cherish it? Ethan placed the knife on the platform. The statue trembled. Its stone eyes opened. System message: the Temple Guardian has been awakened. Offering accepted. The Temple of Upper Peak has been registered as the base of player Ethan Wan. Functions available: protective barrier, workshop, storage, rest area. The statue turned its head and looked at Ethan with its stone eyes. A knife! 3 units of damage. An interesting choice. The voice was female, calm, with a hint of mockery. Ethan shrugged. It's more valuable than it looks. The Guardian looked at him intently. Then she nodded. You're the first person to come here in 300 years. The temple has been waiting. Now it's yours. Ethan stepped out of the hall and looked up at the sky. 2 suns were setting behind the mountains. The world was beautiful. Even after 10 years of war, he couldn't deny that Arkville was a beautiful world. He returned to the passage in the rocks. Fenra was lying where he'd been. His enormous head was turned toward the stars that were beginning to appear in the sky. Did you find anything?" the wolf asked. "A home," Ethan replied. Fenra raised his head. Home. The word echoed in Ethan's mind with an unfamiliar inflection, as if the wolf were tasting it. "I haven't had a home for 3,000 years, not since my mother left." Ethan sat down next to him on the rocks. "The passage is too narrow for you, but the temple stands on the mountain. I can make room for you on the clearing below, with a view of the valley." Fenra looked down. From the summit of Upper Peak, half of the starting zone lay in view. Forests, rivers, the distant lights of the players' first settlements. "Here," said the wolf. "It's good here." They remained silent until both suns had disappeared below the horizon. Then Ethan opened the system window and began to plan. Ethan spent the next 4 days in the temple. He didn't leave the mountain. He didn't hunt. He didn't level up. Any other player in his place would have rushed to farm experience while everyone else was in a panic. But Ethan wasn't just any player. He knew that his class didn't provide combat stats. Leveling up was pointless. His strength lay in his minions, and to summon minions, he needed slots. And to get slots, he needed Fenra's trust. He spent his first morning setting up the temple. The Guardian, whom he began calling Sensei because she spoke like a strict teacher, showed him how to activate the basic functions: the protective barrier, an invisible wall around the temple that kept out uninvited monsters. Workshop, an empty room with an anvil and tools that called for a master blacksmith. Storage, an underground room with stone chests. Rest area, a small room with a stone couch and a fireplace. Ethan cleaned out the living quarters. He swept away the dust. He sealed the cracks in the walls with moss and stones. He found a stream on the mountainside and channeled the water through an old stone trough. The work was hard on a first-level body. His hands ached. His back throbbed. By evening, he could barely stand, but the temple was beginning to look like a livable place rather than a ruin. Fenra watched him from a clearing below. The wolf lay on the rocks and never took his eyes off him. By the end of the first day, he asked, "Why are you cleaning the stones? You could have ordered me to do it. I would have moved that mountain and built you a palace." Ethan stopped, rag in hand. He looked at the wolf. "Because this is my home. And you have to build your own home with your own hands." Fenra was silent. Then he said, "You're a strange man." On the second day, Ethan began to cook. He found wild root vegetables and mushrooms in the forest at the foot of the mountain. The tactics library showed which ones were edible. He lit a fire in the forge because the fireplace in the living quarters wasn't working. He cooked a simple stew in a stone pot he'd found in the storeroom. The food was bland. No salt, no spices, but it was hot. He brought a portion to Fenra. The wolfa looked at the stone bowl. The bowl was the size of his fingernail. Ethan set the bowl on the ground in front of him. "I know you eat reindeer, but I don't have any reindeer. Here, eat this." Fenra leaned in. He sniffed it. He carefully licked a bit of the stew. The bowl was empty in a single flick of his tongue. "You're a strange man," he repeated. Every evening, Ethan would sit next to Fenra on the clearing and talk to him. He didn't give orders. He didn't ask about his abilities. He didn't discuss strategy. He just talked. He asked about the mountains where Fenra had grown up, about his mother, Grimwolf, about what the world was like before the hunters came. Fenra answered briefly, at first with one word, then two. By the third evening, he was speaking in full sentences and asking questions of his own. "Tell me about your world," he said, "the one beyond the convergence." Ethan told him about San Jose, about the office where he wrote code 8 hours a day, about his small apartment, about how there were no dragons or 2 suns there. Fenra listened. Then he asked, "Were you lonely?" Ethan paused. "Yes, I was lonely." Fenra moved closer. The enormous body shifted 1/2 meter. The stones beneath it crunched. "Not anymore," said the wolf. Ethan placed his hand on the wolf's paw. His fur was ice cold. "Not anymore." On the third day, Ethan checked the global chat. The news was predictable. Panic. Chaos. Governments around the world were holding emergency meetings. The military was trying to figure out how to get their citizens out of Arkvel. Players were demanding compensation. The top guilds had already begun dividing up territories. Silver Crown had taken the east coast of the starting zone. The Japanese guild Amaterasu had established a foothold on the islands to the south. The American military group Project Halo had set up a base near the Western Gorge. Everyone was leveling up. Everyone was stockpiling resources. Everyone was preparing for a war they believed was inevitable. Ethan scrolled further down the chat. A screenshot hotshot showing his silhouette and Fenra's had racked up 200,000 views. The comments were mixed. Fake. Photoshopped. Some idiot in Photoshop. No, it's a real screenshot. Streamer Jinxblade has a recording. Oh my god, that's the world boss. Why is he standing next to a human? Who is this guy? If this is true, we're all in trouble. Ethan closed the chat. Fame was coming faster than he'd expected. He had to hurry. On the 4th day, Ethan decided it was time. The trial of double loyalty. He sat down in front of Fenra on the clearing. The wolf lay curled up in a ball. The morning sun glinted off his silvery fur. "Fenra, I need to do something, and to do that, I need to know if you trust me." The wolf opened one eye. "You feed me from a bowl the size of my tooth. You tell me stories about a world without magic. You polish stones instead of ordering me to move a mountain. Of course, I trust you. You're strange, but you're real." Ethan swallowed. "I need to make another pact with another creature. For that, I need a second slot, and for the slot, I need you to let me go, to agree that I won't be with just you." Fenra raised his head. Both eyes were open. The blue light was brighter than usual. "Who? A demoness! Her name is Lilu. She'll be killed in a day if I don't go." Fenra was silent for a long time. The wind whistled between the rocks. Finally, the wolf spoke. "My mother told me about the pacts of the ancients. One person, many beasts. She said that's how it was at the beginning of the world. One shepherd. Many voices. Pause. She said that a shepherd never belongs to just one. He belongs to everyone who believes in him." Fenra stood up. The ground shook. The wolf tilted his enormous head toward Ethan, nose to face. His icy breath burned his skin. "Go. Save your demoness. But if she hurts you, I'll eat her." System message. The trial of double loyalty has been passed. The second pack slot has been unlocked. Slots, 1 of 2. Ethan exhaled. His hands were shaking. He pressed his forehead against Fenra's. The icy fur burned his skin. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Fenra said. "Asa! Just come back." Ethan stepped back. He looked at the wolf, then at the temple, then at the valley below. Tomorrow, on the 6th day of the convergence, 20 hunters will enter the Blood Cathedral dungeon. In a past life, they had killed Lila Weir in 40 minutes, a demoness who had lived in that cathedral for 400 years, who had watched as the hunters burned her kin one by one, who fought to the very end and never uttered a word, because in 400 years no one had ever asked her name. Ethan checked the time. He had 10 hours until the raid. The Bloody Cathedral was a 3-hour ride from Upper Peak on Fenra, but Ethan couldn't take Fenra with him. A level 90 world boss in a level 20 dungeon would attract the attention of the entire server. He had to go alone. Level 1. Unarmed, in a dungeon full of monsters. Ethan smiled. He'd been in dungeons far more terrifying than this. 10 years as a grunt. He knew every trap in every dungeon in this world. The Bloody Cathedral was no exception. He knew the location of every monster. Ethan walked through the forest at night. The torch in his hand cast jagged shadows on the trees. It was quiet all around, too quiet for a forest full of monsters. He followed a route he knew by heart, through Mossy Ravine, along Dead Creek, past the stone pillars. The monsters didn't bother him, not because they were afraid. It was simply that the night monsters in this area were blind and reacted to sound. Ethan moved silently. 10 years of raids had taught him to move like a shadow. 3 hours later, he saw the Bloody Cathedral. The building stood in the middle of a dead forest. The trees around it were black and bare, not a single leaf. The ground beneath his feet was red as blood. The cathedral was enormous. Its Gothic spires soared into the night sky. The stained glass windows glowed crimson from within. The massive doors were covered in chains and runes. System message: Dungeon detected. Blood Cathedral. Levels 18, 22. Recommended party size 15, 20 players. Boss Lilu Weir, the Crimson Blade Demoness. Ethan approached the doors. The chains on them were merely decorative. In his past life, raiders would batter down doors with a battering ram. But Ethan knew that if he pulled the third link of the lower chain on the left, the doors would open silently. He pulled. The link clicked. The chains fell. The doors slowly swung open. Inside was a dark corridor. Red light seeped through cracks in the walls. Underfoot was a stone floor covered in dust. The air smelled of old blood and dampness. Ethan stepped inside. The doors closed behind him. He walked down the corridor without stopping. The first hall with columns. In his past life, 3 skeletal guards had stood here. Now they stood there as well, bony figures with rusty swords in the niches between the columns. They reacted to movement in the center of the hall. Ethan walked along the wall, pressing himself against the stone, moving slowly. The guards didn't move. The second corridor. Traps on the floor, slabs that, when stepped on, fired poisoned arrows from the walls. Ethan remembered the pattern. The third slab was safe. The 5th was safe. The 7th was a trap. The 8th was safe. He walked, counting his steps. Not a single arrow was fired. A staircase leading down. Second floor. It was colder here. The red light grew brighter. Tapestries depicting demons hung on the walls, torn, charred at the edges, as if someone had tried to destroy them but hadn't finished. Ethan turned left. A long corridor with arched openings. Behind each opening was a room. Empty, destroyed. In one, he saw the wreckage of furniture. In another, shattered mirrors. In a third, a pile of rags that had once been clothing. Someone had lived here a long time ago. The left corridor on the second floor led him to a mahogany door. Behind that door was the boss's room. Ethan stopped. He placed his hand on the door. Behind it sat Lilu Weir, a 400-year-old demoness, the world boss of this dungeon. A creature that, in a past life, took 20 hunters 40 minutes to kill. A creature that lowered its sword and closed its eyes when its HP dropped to 0. Ethan pushed the door open. The room beyond was large, a circular hall with a domed ceiling. Stained glass windows lined the walls. Red light streamed in from all directions. In the center of the hall stood a stone throne. A girl sat on the throne. Her white hair fell to her waist, crimson eyes, 2 short horns on her forehead, half hidden by her bangs, a black hooded cloak. A sword lay on her lap, long, slender, red as blood. Lilu Weir. She didn't move. She was looking at Ethan. System warning. Attention, you have entered the boss's room. Lilu Weir, the Scarlet Blade Demoness. Level 22. Recommended party size. 15 to 20 players. Your level, 1. Survival probability, 0%. Ethan closed the system window. He took a step forward, then another. Lilu didn't move. Only her eyes followed him. Scarlet, pupilless, glowing in the dim light. Ethan stopped 10 meters from the throne. He set his backpack on the floor, slowly, without any sudden movements. Then he sat down on a rock, crossed his legs, looked at her. Lilu looked back at him. A minute passed. 2, 3. Silence. Only the sound of dripping water somewhere behind the wall. Lilu spoke first. Her voice was quiet, low, cold. She said he was either a madman or a trap. No hunter had ever come here alone, and no hunter had ever sat on the floor. Ethan replied that he wasn't a hunter. Lilu tilted her head. Her crimson eyes narrowed. She said he smelled like a wolf, a powerful wolf, and that she could sense the pack's mark on him. She asked what he wanted. Ethan answered directly, 20 hunters will come here tomorrow. They'll kill you. I came to make sure that doesn't happen. Lilu was silent. Then she rose from the throne. Slowly, the sword slid from her lap and she caught it by the hilt in a single motion. She was tall, slender. She moved like water, smoothly and continuously. She descended the steps of the throne and stopped 3 meters away from Ethan. He could feel the heat radiating from her. Not warmth, but heat, like that of red-hot metal. She said that over the past 400 years, thousands had come to her. Knights, mages, hunters. They all wanted the same thing, to kill, to claim the loot, to gain experience. She asked how he was different from them. Ethan looked at her. At the horns she hid beneath her bangs. At the sword she held not in a fighting stance, but pressed close to her body. Like a child holds a toy. He said, I know your name. Lilu froze. Your name is Lilu Weir. You've lived here for 400 years. You liked herbal teas made from moon sage. Your kin were wiped out during the 3rd wave of the purge. You're the last of your clan. Lilu didn't move. The sword in her hand trembled. How do you know that? Ethan didn't lie, but he didn't tell the whole truth either. He said he'd seen things that hadn't happened yet. He said that in this vision she had died, and he'd come to change that. Lilu looked at him. Her crimson eyes burned. The heat around her intensified. The stone beneath her feet began to crack. She said she didn't care. That death was better than another 400 years in this empty cathedral, that she was tired of waiting for something that would never happen. Ethan nodded. He understood. He'd been waiting 10 years for someone to notice him, for someone to say thank you, for someone to remember his name. He opened his backpack. He took out a stone pot. A stew made of root vegetables and mushrooms, cold, no salt, no spices. He set the pot on the floor between them. I don't know how to cook, but this is all I have. Lilu looked at the pot, then at Ethan, then back at the pot. She sank to her knees, slowly. The sword lay beside her. She took the pot in both hands. The pot was warm from her body heat. She brought it to her face. She sniffed. "Root vegetables," she said, "and mushrooms, wild ones. Not poisonous, but tasteless. Yes, you brought me food. Yes, why? Because I thought you hadn't eaten in a long time." Lilu held the pot with both hands. Her crimson eyes stared at the murky liquid inside. 400 years. For 400 years, people had come to her with swords and spells, with fire and arrows, with screams and battle cries. Not a single person had ever brought her food. She took a sip, then another, then she finished it all. She set the pot down on the floor. She wiped her lips with the back of her hand. "Tasteless," she said. "I know, but it's hot." It was hot. Ethan wanted to say that the soup had long since gone cold. Then he realized Lilu had warmed it with her own body heat. She was drinking a cold liquid that had grown warm in her hands, and she called it hot, because in 400 years she'd forgotten that food can be hot on its own. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He swallowed. He gathered his thoughts. "The hunters will come tomorrow. 20 men. They're stronger than you." Lilu nodded. "I know. Come with me." She looked at him. "Where?" "I have a home. A temple in the mountains. It's safe there. No one will hurt you there." She was silent. She looked at her hands, at the claws growing from her fingertips, at the red skin on her wrists, hidden by her gloves. "I'm a monster," she said. "Hunters kill monsters. That's the law of this world." Ethan shook his head. "No, that's not the law. It's a habit." Lilu looked up. Her crimson eyes were moist. "Demons don't cry." That was a fact recorded in Arkvel's bestiary. The physiology of demons didn't allow for tear production, but Lilu's eyes were moist. She said she needed to think it over. Ethan nodded. He settled into a more comfortable position. He leaned against the wall. He closed his eyes. He didn't leave. He didn't rush her. He didn't pressure her. He just sat there beside her. In the boss room of a level 20 dungeon. Level 1. Unarmed. Next to a demoness who could kill him with a single flick of her finger, and he waited. An hour passed, 2, 3. Ethan dozed off. Lilu sat on the floor, hugging her knees. The sword lay nearby. She hadn't sheathed it, but she hadn't picked it up either. As morning approached, she spoke, quietly, almost a whisper. She said her real name wasn't Lilu Weir. The system had given her that name. Bosses aren't allowed to have real names. They're just tags in the code. She said that before she became a boss, she was an ordinary demoness. She lived in a village on the border of the Darklands. She brewed potions. She healed the wounded. She had a garden, a small one, with moon sage and night lilies. Then came the convergence. The world became a game. Her village was wiped out. Her kin were turned into mobs. The system appointed her as a boss and placed her on a throne in an empty cathedral. 400 years. For 400 years, she sat on that throne and waited for the hunters who came to kill her for experience. She killed them. They returned. She killed them again. An endless cycle. Until update 2.0 arrived, and death became real. Now the next raid will be the last, for her or for them. Ethan listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he asked one thing. "What was your name?" "Before the system gave you a name." Lila fell silent for a long time. Then she said her name, quietly. So quietly that Ethan could barely make it out. "Vela?" Ethan repeated it. "Vela." She flinched, as if struck. No one had spoken that name in 400 years. "Vela," he said once more. "Let's go home." She stood up. She took her sword. She looked at the cathedral around her, at the empty throne, at the stained glass windows, at the tapestries she hadn't been able to burn completely because they bore the faces of people she knew. She turned to Ethan. She raised her sword. For a second, he thought she was going to strike. Instead, she thrust the sword into the floor at his feet. The HP bar above her head flickered. It began to drop, just like Fenra's, voluntarily. 5%. 4-3. Ethan raised his hand. The pact seal. The runes flared. They flowed from his palm onto Lilu's forehead, onto her horns, onto her white hair. System message. Pact sealed. Lilu Weir. Vale's true name, the Red Blade Dominess, has become your second subordinate. All abilities, memories, and personality traits have been preserved. Pack slot 2 of 2. Lilu lowered her head. Her white hair covered her face. Her shoulders trembled. Ethan stood up. He walked over to her. He held out his hand. She looked at his palm, then at his face. Then she took his hand. Her fingers were hot, almost scorching, but Ethan didn't let go. They left the Blood Cathedral an hour later. The doors closed behind them. A system announcement went out across the server. Attention, the Blood Cathedral dungeon has changed status. Boss absent, dungeon closed, until respawn. In 30 days, the 20 hunters who were preparing for a raid the next day received this message over breakfast. The raid leader cursed. What? Someone's already killed the boss? Alone? Someone cleared a level 20 dungeon solo 6 days after the convergence? Impossible! The global chat exploded again. Ethan was walking through the dead forest. Lilu was walking beside him. She pulled her hood down to hide her horns. Her sword hung on her back. She walked slightly behind him, not beside him, not ahead of him, half a step behind, like a shadow. Ethan stopped. He turned around. Walk beside me. She looked at him. She took a step forward. She stood beside him, shoulder to shoulder. They continued on, toward the temple, toward home. Lilu remained silent the whole way. But when Upper Peak appeared on the horizon and the temple's lights glowed on its slope, she said one word, home. And Ethan nodded. Yes, home. Lilu stood at the edge of the clearing and looked at Fenra. The wolf lay on the rocks below and looked up at her. Two world-class beings studied each other in the morning light. Ethan stood between them and felt the resonance of the pact humming in his chest. Wariness from both of them. Not hostility, but not trust either. Fenra spoke first. The voice in Ethan's head was steady. She smells of blood. Old blood. Many peoples. Lilu narrowed her crimson eyes. She too sensed the resonance and heard the wolf's words through the pact's bond. She replied aloud. Her voice was cold. She said he smelled of snow and self-satisfaction. Fenra raised his head. Ethan waited. This was important. His subordinates had to get along, not love each other, at least tolerate one another. The wolf stood up. The ground shook. He was 3 times Lilu's size. His shadow covered the entire clearing. He tilted his head toward the demoness. He sniffed the air around her. Lilu didn't move. She didn't back away. Only her hand slid toward the hilt of the sword behind her back. An automatic gesture. 400 years of reflexes. Fenra spoke. She's hungry. Ethan blinked. Lilu blinked. The wolf lay back down on the rocks. He turned his head toward Ethan. Feed her. She hasn't eaten properly in a long time. I can sense it. Lilu took her hand off the sword. She looked at the wolf, then at Ethan. Then she turned away, but Ethan noticed her shoulders tremble. He went into the temple to prepare breakfast, root vegetables and mushrooms. That was all he had.
While he was building a fire in the smithy, Lilu followed him inside. She sat down silently by the wall. She pulled her hood down lower.
She watched him clean the mushrooms. 10 minutes later, she said he wasn't cleaning them right. You have to remove the top layer or they'll taste bitter. Ethan handed her the knife. She cleaned the mushrooms quickly and precisely. Her fingers moved with confidence. 400 years ago, she'd been making herbal decoctions. Her hands still remembered. They cooked together in silence. The soup turned out better than yesterday's. Lilu added some leaves she'd found on the mountainside. She said it was mountain thyme. Not a spice, but better than nothing. Ethan poured the soup into 3 bowls. He took one to Fenre. The wolf looked at the bowl, which was the size of his claw, and sighed, but he ate it in a single flick of his tongue, as always. Ethan placed the second bowl in front of Lilu. She took the bowl with both hands. Her fingers warmed the stone. The broth began to boil. Lilu drank in small sips, her eyes closed. Ethan ate the third bowl himself, sitting on the temple threshold, watching the two suns rise above the mountains. It was the 6th day of the convergence. The world outside was changing rapidly. Ethan checked the global chat every morning and every evening. The panic of the first few days had given way to organized chaos. Governments had set up coordination centers. The military had taken control of the exit points from Arkval. The top guilds began seriously dividing up territories. Silver Crown declared itself the largest guild on the East Coast. Kaiser Lee gave an interview to a streamer with an audience of 1 million. He spoke confidently, calmly, like a man who knows that the world belongs to the strong. He said that Silver Crown would protect anyone who joined, that the weak must follow the strong, that this was the law of the new world. Ethan watched the recording and felt a familiar chill inside. That voice, that confidence, that condescending gaze. For 10 years, he'd heard that voice every day. For 10 years, he'd stood in the back rows at meetings while Kaiser handed out orders. For 10 years, he'd brought him coffee and received nod instead of thanks. Ethan closed the recording. Enough. He needed to plan ahead. 2 packs out of 2 slots were filled. The third slot required a new trial, and he needed a third subordinate. Ethan knew who he wanted next. Arachne, the Spider Queen, the world boss of the Dead Forest dungeon. But the Dead Forest wouldn't open for another 3 weeks. Dungeons in Arkval appeared on a schedule. Every 30 days, the respawn cycle created new dungeons and refreshed the old ones, according to the schedule. The Dead Forest was set to open on the 28th day. Ethan had 3 weeks. 3 weeks to prepare, to level up at least to the minimum required to survive a level 35 dungeon, to unlock the third packed slot, and to solve a problem that was growing more urgent with each passing day. People were looking for him. The global chat was buzzing with rumors. A mysterious player with a world boss. Who was he? Where was he? How did he do it? A streamer's screenshot had racked up 500,000 views. Theories began to surface. A bug? A cheat? A secret government project. The Silver Crown Guild had announced a reward for information, 50,000 gold coins, a sum that would take an ordinary hunter's breath away. Ethan knew that sooner or later they would find him. Upper Peak was a hidden location, but not an invisible one. All it would take was for a single scout to wander too far into the mountains and spot Fenru on the platform. He needed a disguise. He turned to the temple's guardian. Sensei, is there a way to conceal the presence of world-class beings within the temple grounds? The keeper looked at him with stony eyes. Yes, the silent veil barrier, a function of the temple that conceals the auras of all beings within the perimeter. The cost: 10,000 mana units per day. You currently have 0 mana. The Monster Lord class has no mana. Ethan rubbed the bridge of his nose. Of course, his class granted him neither strength nor magic nor mana. He was the most useless fighter in the world, yet he had the strongest subordinates. But his subordinates did have mana. Lilu. Ethan turned to the demoness sitting by the wall, cleaning her sword. "How much mana do you have?" she replied, without looking up. 18,000. That'll be enough. Ethan explained the plan. Lilu would power the barrier with her mana, 10,000 per day. She'd have 8,000 left, which would regenerate overnight. She agreed without question. She simply nodded and placed her hand on the altar slab in the main hall. The runes flared to life. An invisible veil hung around the temple. System message. The silent veil barrier has been activated. All auras within the temple grounds are hidden from external detection. Ethan exhaled. One problem solved. He spent the next few days preparing. In the mornings, he trained. Not in combat. His class didn't allow him to fight on equal terms, even with a low-level monster. He trained his body, running along mountain trails, push-ups and pull-ups on the temple's stone beams. His level rose slowly. The reverse experience from Fenra and Lulu yielded only crumbs, enough to reach level 3 in a week. Ridiculous. Ordinary hunters had reached level 10 in the same amount of time, but Ethan didn't need a high level. He just needed to survive long enough to reach the boss and say the right words. In the afternoon, he studied the tactics library. The system interface displayed the attack patterns of every monster he remembered from his past life. He scrolled through the data on Arachne for hours. The Spider Queen was more difficult than Lulu, level 35, 3 phases of combat, poisonous attacks, web traps, and most importantly, she wasn't alone. She had children. Thousands of tiny spiders living in the dead forest under her protection. Killing Arachne meant destroying the entire colony. In his past life, a raid of 30 hunters had burned the dead forest to the ground just to reach the boss. Ethan remembered the smell of burning spiderwebs. In the evenings, he would sit with Lulu and Fenra. It had become a ritual. Soup, conversation, silence. Lulu was gradually warming up to him. She still slept by the door to his room every night. Ethan noticed this on the second morning when he stepped out and tripped over her. She was lying, curled up in a ball on the stone floor. Her hood pulled tight, her sword pressed against her chest. He didn't ask why. He knew. 400 years of loneliness. The fear that he wouldn't be there in the morning, that it would all turn out to be a dream. Ethan brought her a blanket, or rather what he'd managed to cobble together from moss and large leaves. It turned out lopsided and prickly. Lulu looked at the blanket, then at him. "What's that?" she said. "The blanket. It's prickly." "I know." She took the blanket, wrapped herself in it, lay back down by the door. Ethan returned to the room. A minute later, he heard a soft sound, not crying. Demons don't cry, just breathing, rapid and ragged. He lay down and closed his eyes. On the 14th day of the convergence, what Ethan had been waiting for happened. A system notification was sent to all players on the server. Attention! First world event, Invasion of the Ice Elementals. Duration, 72 hours. Zone, Northern Plains. Reward, unique rank, A gear. The top guilds sprang into action. Silver Crown, Amaterasu. Project Halo, tens of thousands of hunters set off for the Northern Plains. Ethan read the announcement and nodded. He remembered this event. He'd participated in it in a past life. He'd stood in the back rows, debuffing the elementals while the main team dealt damage. He'd received a shard of ice stone and patted on the shoulder. But right now he didn't need the event. He needed something else. While the entire server was looking north, Ethan was looking south, because he remembered a detail that no one else knew. During the invasion of the ice elementals, a hidden NPC would appear in the southern forests for 3 days. An old alchemist named Garen. He sold a single item, the Potion of Silence. An elixir that completely concealed a player's presence from all detection systems for 24 hours. No aura scans, no tracking, complete invisibility to the system. The 28th day of the convergence. A system notification arrived at dawn. A new dungeon has been discovered. The Dead Forest. Levels 30, 38. Recommended party size, 25, 30 players. Boss, Arachne, Queen of Spiders. Ethan stood on the temple plaza and looked east. Somewhere out there, beyond the forests and plains, the black spot of the Dead Forest was already appearing on the world map. He knew that in 2 days, the first guild scouts would reach the dungeon. In 4 days, test raids would begin. In a week, they'd assemble a full-fledged group of 30 hunters. In his past life, they'd burned the entire forest to the ground. Ethan drank the Potion of Silence. The murky liquid burned his throat. System message. Effect activated. Silence. Duration. 24 hours. Your presence is hidden from all detection systems. He turned to Fenray and Lila. The wolf was lying on his pad. The demoness stood at the temple entrance. Both were looking at him. They knew the plan. He had explained everything in advance. Arachne isn't like Lila. She isn't alone. She has children. thousands of spiders who depend on her. She'll defend them until her last breath. Approaching her with food and kind words won't work. A different approach is needed. Ethan turned to Lila, the third slot. She nodded. She knew what was required of her. Ethan had found the trial for the third slot in the tactics library 2 days ago. The trial of the shared burden, the condition 2 subordinates must simultaneously and voluntarily surrender a portion of their power to the pact bearer for a time. Temporary loss of levels, a painful process, a risk for the subordinates. Fenra and Lilu agreed without hesitation. Fenra said he'd lost even more before. Lilu simply nodded, and Ethan activated the trial. The runes on his hands flared. Fenra growled quietly through clenched teeth. His fur dimmed for a moment. His level dropped from 90 to 85. Lilu clenched her fists. Her crimson eyes flashed brighter. Then they dimmed. Her level dropped from 22 to 19. Ethan felt power surge through his body. Not his own power, borrowed, temporary, but enough. System message. The trial of the shared burden has been completed. The third pact slot has been unlocked. Temporary bonus, plus 15 to stamina, plus 10 to speed. Duration 48 hours. Slots, 2 out of 3. Ethan looked at his hands. They glowed with a faint blue light. He felt lighter, faster. As if he'd shed 10 kilograms and downed 3 cups of coffee, still at level 3. The damage was still laughable, but his body could now run nonstop for 6 hours instead of 20 minutes. He bowed to Fenra. He bowed to Lil. He turned and ran eastward, toward the dead forest. He ran all day, across fields and rivers, past player settlements that were springing up like mushrooms, past guild patrols. The silence potion was working. Not a single scan detected him. He was a ghost. By nightfall, he saw the dead forest. Even from a distance, it looked wrong. The trees were black, not dark green, black. Their trunks covered in something resembled tar. The branches were entangled in cobwebs, silvery, thick and glistening in the moonlight. The air around the forest felt different, heavy, slightly sweet, like overripe fruit. Ethan entered the forest. Dry branches covered in cobwebs crunched under his feet. Webs hung between the trees, huge ones, perfectly geometric. Drops of dew glistened in them. Beautiful, deadly beautiful. The tactics library highlighted data at the edge of his vision. Each web was a trap. Touching a thread activated an alarm. Arachne would detect the intrusion the very same second. In his past life, the raid had charged head-on. They'd burned the webs with fire magic, slashed the webs with swords. Arachne knew about them a kilometer away. Ethan didn't touch the webs. He walked between the threads. He ducked. He crouched. He stepped over them. Sometimes he crawled. The potion of silence hid him from the system's scans, but not from the physical threads. He moved slowly. 1 hour for every 100 meters. 2 hours for every 200. Deep in the forest, he began to notice spiders, small ones, the size of a palm, black with silvery stripes. They sat on the branches and watched him with dozens of eyes. They didn't attack, they just watched. Ethan stopped in front of one. The little spider sat at the level of his face. 8 eyes stared expressionlessly. Ethan slowly raised his hand. The spider didn't move. Ethan extended a finger. The spider touched it with the tip of its leg. A light touch. Then it recoiled and scurried away along the branch. Ethan walked on. The spiders followed him. Dozens, hundreds. They scurried along the branches and trunks parallel to his path. They didn't attack. They watched. And reported. Ethan knew that Arachne already knew about him. She sensed every spider in her forest, every vibration of every thread. She knew he was coming, knew he was alone, knew he wasn't touching the web, and that puzzled her. 4 hours later, the forest parted. Ethan emerged into a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a tree, huge, black, dead. Its trunk was hollow. Inside, something glowed with a violet light. A web covered everything. The tree, the ground, the air. Silvery threads formed a dome over the clearing like a cathedral of silk. And in the center of this cathedral, seated on a throne of web, sat Arachne. In her true form, she was enormous. A body the size of a car.
8 long legs, black chitin with a violet sheen, 8 eyes blazing with violet fire, a pattern of silvery lines on her back, a crown of cobwebs on her head. System warning, warning, you have entered the world boss zone. Arachne, queen of spiders, level 38. Recommended party size 25 to 30 players. Your level is 3. Temporary bonuses are active. Probability of survival cannot be calculated.
Arachne didn't move. 8 eyes stared at Ethan. Tiny spiders covered every surface around him. Thousands, tens of thousands. Their eyes glinted in the violet lights. Ethan took a step into the clearing, then another. He stopped 20 meters from the throne. He bowed. Low, the way one bows to the mistress of the house when entering uninvited. Arachne stirred. One of her front legs tapped against the throne's web, rhythmically. Tap, tap, tap. Then she spoke. Her voice was deep, feminine, echoing, as if 100 voices were speaking at once. She said that in 1,000 years, no creature had ever entered her forest so quietly, and none had ever bowed. Ethan straightened up. He looked her in the eyes, all 8 of them. He said he hadn't come to kill. She tilted her head. 1,000 years, she said. For 1,000 years, people have come here only to kill. Why are you here if not for that? Ethan took a small bundle out of his backpack. He unwrapped it. Inside was a bundle of dried herbs. He'd found them at the foot of Upper Peak, moon sage, and mountain thyme. Lilu had shown him how to dry them properly. He placed the herbs on the ground between himself and Arachne. She said she wanted to make you some tea. Arachne froze. Her 8 eyes widened. Tap, tap, tap. Her front leg stopped tapping. How do you know? Ethan replied. I've read about you in ancient descriptions of your species. They said your people loved herbal infusions, that you gathered herbs in the mountain meadows long before the hunters arrived. Arachne was silent for a long time. The little spiders around her froze. The forest fell silent. Even the wind died down. Then she descended from her throne. Slowly, carefully. Her enormous body moved with unexpected grace. She approached the grasses, bent down, touched them with the tip of her front leg. Moon sage, she said. 1,000 years. No one had remembered for 1,000 years. Ethan sat down on the ground. He took out a stone cup from the temple, the only one he'd found, a small one with a crack along the rim. He placed a pinch of sage into it. He looked at Arachne. I need hot water, he said. Arachne raised one of her legs. A thin thread of web emerged from the tip. She lowered the thread into the cup. The thread glowed. The water inside began to boil, not from heat, but from magic. Arachne's web could do anything. Create, destroy, and boil water for tea. Ethan took out the cup. He held it out to her. She took the cup with her 2 front legs. The cup was tiny in her paws. She brought it to her mandibles. She took a sip. She set the cup down on the web. 1,000 years, child. 1,000 years. And no one remembered. Ethan nodded. Then he spoke. He told her everything. Not the whole truth, but enough. That hunters would come here in a week, 30 men, that they would burn the forest, that they would kill every spider in their path, that they would kill her, and that he had come to offer another way. Arachne listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked one question. My children. What will happen to my children? Ethan looked at the thousands of tiny spiders all around them. I have a temple in the mountains, a barrier that hides it from detection, a territory large enough for a colony, trees and rocks for webs, water, grasses on the slopes. Arachne looked at him with her 8 eyes. You're offering me a home. Yes, for me and for all my children, for everyone. She was silent. Then she turned toward the forest, toward her forest, toward the trees she had been weaving around for 1,000 years, toward the earth into which the threads of generations had been woven. To leave this place meant leaving everything behind. Ethan understood. He waited. Arachne turned back. I saw the fire, she said. In my visions, I knew they would come. I knew my children would perish. I was preparing to die. A pause. You're the first one to offer me a chance to live. She lowered her head. Her enormous body folded, 8 legs bent. The HP bar flickered. Ethan raised his hand. Wait. She stopped. I need to say something. The pact means you'll become my subordinate. I don't want you to agree just out of fear for your children. Arachne looked at him, 8 violet eyes. Child, for 1,000 years I was the queen of the empty forest. They called me your majesty and bowed before plunging their swords into me. You came with a cup of tea and called me by my name. I'm not afraid to be your subordinate. I'm afraid that you'll leave and never come back. HP bar dropped. 5%. 4. 3. Ethan pressed his palm against her chitin. Cold, smooth. The pact seal. The runes flared. System message, pact sealed. Arachne, queen of spiders, has become your 3rd subordinate. All abilities, memories, and personality traits have been preserved. Pack slot 3 of 3. Addendum, dead forest colony. 14,328 spiders recognize you as their patron. They are not subordinates, but follow Arachne of their own free will. Ethan withdrew his hand. He looked out at the clearing. Thousands of tiny spiders were staring at him. 14,000 eyes. He swallowed hard. Ethan turned to Arachne. We need to leave. Tonight. All of us. Arachne nodded. She raised her front leg. She touched the main thread of the web. A vibration rippled through the entire forest. The spiders stirred all at once. 14,000 creatures began to move, gathering cocoons with eggs, winding up their threads to prepare for the crossing. Arachne looked down at Ethan. You're going to need a bigger temple, child? Ethan looked at the army of spiders lining up in a column. I know, he said quietly. Crossing Arkville at night with 14,000 spiders was not what Ethan had in mind when he thought of stealth. The column stretched for half a kilometer. The small spiders scurried across the ground, up trees, and over rocks. They carried cocoons filled with eggs. They carried supplies of spider webs. They carried their wounded and elderly on their backs. Arachne led the way. In the darkness, she was nearly invisible. Her black chitin blended into the night. Only her violet eyes glowed like lighthouses. Ethan walked beside her. The temporary bonuses from the trial were still active. His legs didn't tire. His breathing was steady. But his head was buzzing from the resonance. 3 subordinates, 3 streams of emotion at once. Fenra was far away on Upper Peak. He radiated calm and a slight impatience. Lilu was there too. She radiated anxiety, acute anxiety. She feared for Ethan. Arachne was nearby. She radiated deep exhaustion and something akin to sadness. She was leaving home, her 1,000-year-old home. They'd been walking for 6 hours. By dawn, they'd reached the base of Upper Peak. Fenra was waiting on the lower platform. He saw the column of spiders and climbed up. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. His eyes glowed brighter. Spiders, he said in Ethan's mind. Many spiders, so many. Ethan nodded. They're with us. Fenra looked at Arachne. Arachne looked at Fenra. 2 world bosses. 2 creatures that, in another life, could have destroyed a small town. They stood there, sizing each other up. Fenra spoke first. You're big, Arachne replied. So are you. Fenra lay back down on the rocks. Arachne walked past him toward the mountainside. 14,000 spiders flowed behind her like a black river. Lilu stood at the temple entrance, staring at the column, her crimson eyes wide open. She turned to Ethan. What is that? Our new family, Ethan replied. The following week, they settled in. Arachne took over the eastern slope of the mountain. A web covered the rocks and trees in a single night, silvery, strong, beautiful. By the 3rd day, the eastern slope looked like a palace made of silk. The spiders worked without stop. They built nests. They spun signal threads. They created an alert system that covered the entire mountain. The temple's guardian watched what was happening with an expression that was surprisingly expressive for a stone face. She said it hadn't been this noisy in the temple in 300 years. The silent veil barrier was operating at its limit. 10,000 mana per day was no longer enough. The aura of 14,000 spiders, plus Arachne, plus Fenra, plus Lilu. Lilu had increased the consumption to 15,000. Arachne added her mana. Together, they maintained the barrier, but Ethan knew this couldn't go on for long. They needed resources, food, materials, gold to buy from NPCs, and to do that, they had to venture out into the world. Ethan convened his first council meeting. In the main hall of the temple, he was sitting on a stone step. Fenra was lying by the entrance, his head inside, his body outside. He simply didn't fit. Lilu was sitting to Ethan's right, her hood off, her horns visible. She had stopped hiding them in the temple. Arachne took her place against the left wall, in human form, a form she had assumed that morning, a tall woman in a black dress, pale skin, dark hair down to her waist. 8 thin, gossamer-like threads stretched from her back like a cape. Violet eyes, a calm smile. Ethan looked at them, at his team, a wolf the size of a bus, a demoness with scarlet eyes, a spider woman in a black dress. 3 creatures the world considered monsters. He began to speak. He explained the situation. In 2 months, the regional tournament would take place, the first official competition between guilds. In his past life, Silver Crown had won the tournament. Kaiser Lee had personally stepped into the arena. The world had applauded. Ethan wanted the world to see something different this time. But to do that, they first had to legalize their existence, a guild of monsters. There was nothing like that in Arkville. The system allowed for the registration of guilds composed of any sentient beings. Technically, Fenra, Lilu, and Arachne qualified. But no guild in history had ever included former world bosses. The world's reaction was unpredictable. Lilu said she didn't care what the world thought. Arachne said she'd been a queen for 1,000 years and had no intention of hiding in the mountains forever. Fenra said he wanted meat, not politics. Ethan smiled. All right, but before registering, there was one more thing to decide. People. Ethan knew that a guild made up entirely of monsters wouldn't last. Not in battle, not in politics. The world wouldn't accept an organization without a single human, except for one strange third-level guy. He needed people, specific people, those he knew from his past life, people he could save. So Yonhan, a healer priestess, rank B, 19 years old. In his past life, she died 2 weeks later. At level 40, during a raid on the Abyss Hydra. Her team used her as bait and abandoned her. Ethan remembered the date. He remembered the place. He remembered the name of the raid leader who gave the order. He had 12 days. Mina Fletcher, an S-rank swordswoman, 24 years old, captain of the Iron Vow Guild. In a month, her own team would accuse her of leaking data. They'd set her up. They'd take her weapons. They'd suspend her. In her past life, Mina had gone on solo raids after that and died 6 months later in a dungeon from which no one returns. Ethan knew the truth. He knew who had orchestrated the frame-up. He knew where the evidence was kept. Juhi So, Scout Recon, A rank, 20 years old. In 3 weeks, the Korean Military Guild would sell her data to the Japanese Amaterasu, a political deal. Juhi would die in an ambush. Ethan was supposed to get her out a week before that. 3 people, 3 lives he could have saved, 3 future guild members. He started with Soyeon. The next morning, Ethan came down from the mountain, alone, in ordinary clothes, no system markings. Level 3, and nothing remarkable. He was heading toward the nearest player settlement, Dawn Town, the first town the players had built in the starting zone. Wooden houses, a marketplace, a tavern, a bulletin board, 2,000 residents. Ethan entered the town and blended into the crowd. Just another low-level player. There were thousands like him. No one paid him any attention. He found So Yawn, 2 hours later, she was sitting by the fountain in the square, small, thin. Dark hair tied back in a ponytail, pale face, dark circles under her eyes. A healer's staff leaned against a bench. On her shoulder was the patch of the Hydra 3 raid group. Ethan stopped 10 meters away. He looked at her, a 19-year-old girl who would die in 12 days because her team would decide that a B-rank priestess was cheaper than store-bought bait. He walked over, sat down next to her. She looked at him, polite, cautious. He said his name was Ethan. She replied that her name was So-Yan. He asked which team she was on. She said, Hydra 3, raid group, specialization, water dungeons. He asked if she liked it there. She paused, then she said yes. Of course. It's a good team. She smiled. The smile was familiar, rehearsed. Ethan had seen smiles like that for 10 years. In his own mirror, he leaned in closer, quietly, so only she could hear. The raid on Hydra of the Abyss is in 12 days. Don't go, please. She looked at him. The smile vanished. How do you know about the raid? It hasn't been announced yet. Ethan couldn't explain. He couldn't say he was from the future. He couldn't tell her he'd seen a recording of her death, but he could tell her the truth. Part of it. I know people who've been on raids like this. I know how missions end when a healer is put on the front lines without protection. I know what it means to be the one who gets left behind. Jan looked at him. Something flashed in her eyes. Recognition. Not of his face, but of his words. Were you like that too? She asked quietly. Ethan nodded. 10 years. She was silent, twisting the edge of her sleeve between her fingers. I can't leave the team. I have nowhere to go. I don't have any gold. No gear except this staff. No contacts. Without Hydra 3, I'm just a B-rank priestess without a group. Ethan pulled a stone out of his pocket. Small. Smooth. With an engraved rune, a coordinate stone. He'd had it made that morning, asking the temple's guardian for help. The stone pointed the way to Upper Peak. Take it. If you decide to leave, this stone will show you the way. It's safe there. There's a place for you there. So Jan took the stone. She turned it over in her fingers. She looked at the rune, then at Ethan. Why are you doing this? Ethan stood up. He looked up at the sky. Arkvel's 2 sons. Because last time there was no one to tell me the same thing. He turned and walked away. So-Yan sat on the bench with the stone in her hand, watching him go. So-Yan arrived on the 7th day. Ethan was sitting on the temple threshold when he saw a small figure climbing the mountain trail, a staff in her hand, a backpack on her back, a bruise on her face, fresh under her left eye. She stopped at the entrance. She looked at the temple, at the stone walls entwined with ivy, at Arachne's web glistening in the sun. At Fenru lying on the clearing below, the wolf raised its head. It looked at her. Small, it said, in Ethan's mind. Skinny, I should feed her. So-Yan stared at the wolf. Her mouth was open. Her eyes were huge. The staff fell from her hand. Ethan stood up. He walked over to her. She shifted her gaze to him. That's the world one. That, yes. She opened her mouth, closed it. Opened it again. What about him? He lives here. Yes. She sat down on the ground, right where she'd been standing. Her legs buckled. Ethan sat down beside her. He waited. So-Yan was breathing rapidly. Then she looked at the bruise on her arm, then at the bruise under her eye, the raid leader. She said quietly, I asked why they were putting me on the front line without a shield user. He answered with his fist. Ethan clenched his teeth. He knew that raid leader. In his past life, the man had risen to the rank of Silver Crown Officer. Kaiser Lee had personally promoted him for effectiveness. Ethan reached out his hand. Welcome home. So-Yan took his hand. She stood up. She looked at the temple, at Fenru, at the web. I think I've gone crazy, she said. Perhaps, Ethan replied. But there's good company here. He led her inside. Lila was waiting in the main hall. She saw So-Yan. She looked at the bruise. Her crimson eyes narrowed. Who did this? So-Yan recoiled. The demoness stood before her. White hair, horns, crimson eyes, a sword on her back. So Jan turned even paler, if that was possible. Lilu didn't answer me, she told Ethan. Who did this? Ethan shook his head. Later. Lilu looked at him, at So Jan. Then she turned and went into the kitchen. 10 minutes later, she returned with a bowl of soup. She set it in front of So Jan. Ate. So Jan looked at the bowl, at the demoness, at the bowl. She took it. She began to eat. Her hands were shaking. The soup was spilling. Lilu silently took the bowl away. She waited until So Jan's hands stopped shaking. She handed it back. So Jan finished eating. She looked up. Thank you. Lilu shrugged. It's nothing. It doesn't taste good anyway. So Jan settled into the living quarters. A small room next to Ethan's room. A stone bench. A blanket made of moss and leaves. Better than the barracks at Hydra Camp -3, where she'd slept on the floor between boxes of gear. The first night, Ethan didn't sleep. He lay there and listened. Quiet sobbing came from So Jan's room. From the hallway came the breathing of Lilu, who was still sleeping by his door. Somewhere outside, Fenra sighed. Arachne's web rustled softly in the wind. His home, his strange, impossible home, full of creatures the world didn't notice. The next day, Ethan began training So Jan, not like the raid leader of Hydra 3, not with shouting and fists. He took her out to the open area in front of the temple. He asked her to show him what she could do. So Jan demonstrated 3 healing spells, basic ones, weak ones, B rank. Ethan opened the tactics library. Data on the healer priestess class unfolded before his eyes. In his past life, he'd seen dozens of priestesses on raids. He knew their potential better than they did themselves. So, Jan, do you know that your class can cast protective spheres? She blinked. Protective spheres?
That's an A-rank technique. I'm still 10 levels away from that. Ethan shook his head. A system restriction, not a real one. The technique is available starting at level 15 if you know the correct sequence of gestures.
It's not your level that's holding you back. You're missing the knowledge. He showed her the sequence. 3 gestures, left hand up, right hand in a circle, both together toward the ground. So Jan repeated them. Hesitantly, a light flashed at her fingertips. Not a sphere, a spark, but a spark.
She looked at her hands. This works. Ethan nodded. Practice. You'll get it by evening. By morning, it'll be consistent. So Jan repeated the gestures all day. By sunset, she'd managed to create a sphere. Small, weak, crooked, but a sphere. She stood inside a shimmering blue bubble and laughed for the first time since Ethan had met her. Lilu watched from the doorway. She walked over to Ethan, quietly so Jan wouldn't hear. You know things you shouldn't know. Ethan looked at her. Yes. How did you know? He paused. He thought about what to say. He decided to tell the truth. Because Lilu deserved the truth. I've already lived this life once. 10 years. I've seen everything that's going to happen. I know who will die. I know who will betray us. I came back to change that. Lilu was silent. She looked at him. Her crimson eyes were expressionless. Then she asked one thing. Did you see my death? Yes. And you came to prevent it? Yes. Because you remembered my name. Ethan looked at her. Because you lowered your sword and closed your eyes. And no one stopped you. Lilu turned away. She stood there for a second. She walked out into the hallway. She laid down by his door, just like every night. 10 days later, Ethan went after Mina Fletcher. He knew where she was, the Iron Vow Guild camp on the western border of the starting zone, a major American guild. 300 fighters, good equipment, discipline, and rotten leadership. Mina was the captain of the 3rd Squad, an S-rank swordswoman, the guild's best fighter. And in 3 weeks, she'd be set up. Ethan arrived at the Iron Vow camp, disguised as a merchant. He bought a basket of apples from an NPC and entered through the trade gate. No one checked merchants. He found Mina on the training grounds. She was exactly as he remembered her. Tall, short chestnut hair, straight back. The sword in her hand moved as if it were an extension of her body, fast, precise, beautiful. She was training alone, chopping at a wooden post. Strike, strike, strike. Every strike in a straight line. Perfect technique. Ethan approached. She stopped, looked at him, gray eyes. A direct gaze. A merchant. No. He said he needed to talk. In private. Mina frowned. What about? He said one name. Davis Cole. Mina froze. Her hand tightened around her sword. Davis Cole was the vice captain of the Iron Vow. The man who in 3 weeks would set Mina up. How do you know that name? Ethan replied. In 3 weeks, Davis Cole will accuse you of leaking raid data. He'll plant evidence. He'll take your sword. You'll be expelled from the guild. Mina stared at him. Her gray eyes turned cold. Who sent you? He replied, no one. Prove it. Ethan pulled a small crystal from his pocket, a memory crystal. He'd asked the temple's guardian to create it. The crystal contained a recording, a conversation between Davis Cole and an officer of the Japanese Amaterasu Guild, a recording from a future that hadn't happened yet. But Ethan knew when and where this conversation would take place. He had arrived at the meeting spot 2 days before it happened. He hid. He recorded it. The crystal displayed a hologram. Davis Cole was talking to the Japanese man. He was discussing the price for the Iron Vow data. He was discussing how to frame Mina to divert suspicion away from himself. Mina was staring at the hologram. Her face was stony. Her hands were clenched into fists. When the recording ended, she was silent for 30 seconds. Then she said one word. When? 3 weeks. What should I do? Ethan handed her a coordinate stone. The second one. Exactly the same as Soyan's. You have a choice. Stay and expose him yourself, or leave now. In either case, you have a place to go. Mina looked at the stone, then at Ethan. Why are you helping me? Because a swordsman shouldn't be a weapon in someone else's hands. Mina took the stone, clenched it in her fist, looked toward the camp, at the tents, at the Iron Vow flags, at the place that had been her home for 3 years. I'll expose him myself, she said, and I'll come to you when I'm done. Ethan nodded, turned around, walked away. Mina stood on the clearing with the stone in her hand and her sword on her back. 3 days later, the news blew up the global chat. Iron Vow Captain Mina Fletcher publicly accused Vice Captain Davis Cole of spying for Amaterasu. She presented evidence. Davis was arrested. Iron Vow was in chaos. Mina resigned and left. No one knew where she went. 5 days later, she climbed the mountain trail to the temple with a sword on her back and a coordinate stone in her pocket. Ethan met her at the entrance. Welcome. Mina looked at the temple, at Fenru, at the Yara, at Leela, who was standing in the doorway, at So-Yon, who was practicing defensive spheres in the courtyard. An interesting place, Mina said. An unusual group. Ethan nodded. You'll like it. Mina looked at him, straightforward. No smile. I don't need to like it. I need it to be honest. It's honest here, Ethan replied. Mina nodded. She entered the temple, Ju-Hee. So was the most difficult one. Not because she was hard to find, but because she didn't trust anyone. Ethan knew this from his past life. An A-rank scout, the best of her generation, fast as the wind, silent as a shadow, and paranoid to the core. In his past life, the Korean military guild had used her as a scout for 3 years. Then they sold her data to the Japanese Amaterasu in a political deal. Ju-Hee found out the day before the ambush, but it was too late. She didn't have time to escape. In this life, Ethan was supposed to get her out a week before the data was sold. The problem was that Ju-Hee wasn't standing around in public squares or training at open ranges. She was out in the field, always in the field, on reconnaissance, on solo missions behind enemy lines, finding a scout who doesn't want to be found, a fool's errand. Ethan was a fool with 10 years of memories. He knew Ju-Hee's roots. In his past life, he'd read the declassified reports of the Korean Military Guild 2 years after her death. Roots, call signs, contact points, schedule. He knew that on the 43rd day of the convergence, Ju-Hee would be on a reconnaissance mission in the Twilight Marshes, alone, out of contact with base for 6 hours, a window of opportunity. Ethan left the temple at dawn, alone. Fenra looked at him. Alone again. Yes, the wolf sighed. Every time you leave alone, the back of my neck itches. Ethan smirked. I'll be back. You always say that. And I always come back. Fenra rested his head on his paws. See you later, he said quietly. Ethan walked toward the twilight marshes all day. By evening, he reached the edge of the marshes, a nasty place, green sludge, fog, trees with roots like tentacles, the smell of rot, sounds he didn't want to identify. The tactics library displayed the data, level 25 swamp slugs, poisonous toads, level 28. A level 32 swamp guardian in the center, and somewhere here among them, Juhu So was moving. Ethan didn't venture into the swamp. He knew Juhei would come out on her own in 3 hours. Past a certain point on the northeastern shore, he sat down on a rock by the shore and waited. 3 hours and 12 minutes later, the bushes behind him rustled. The blade of a dagger pressed against his throat. Don't move. Ethan didn't move. His heart was pounding, but his voice remained calm. Juhei So. Call, sign Shadow 7. 3rd Intelligence Division of the Korean Military Guild. The blade pressed closer. Who are you? Ethan 1. I've come to save your life. Silence. The blade didn't move. Then Juhei stepped out from behind him. She stood before him, a dagger in her hand, black clothing, a hood. Beneath the hood, a young face, 20 years old, sharp features, dark eyes, alert like a cat before it pounces. Speak, Ethan spoke quickly. In a week, the 3rd Division will pass your data on to Amaterasu, routes, call signs, safe houses, everything. Amaterasu will set up an ambush. You'll die. Juhi's expression didn't change. Not a single muscle twitched. Her eyes were unmoving. How do you know that? Same question, always the same question. Ethan answered like Lilu, with the truth. I've lived this life once before, 10 years ahead. I saw the report of your death. I know the names of those who signed the deal. General Huan and Officer Matsumoto. Juhei blinked once. That was the only sign of surprise she allowed herself. You know Huan. I know everyone, Ethan replied. A pause. Juhei sheathed her dagger. She looked him over appraisingly, from head to toe. Level 3, no weapons, no gear, ordinary clothes, physically weak. You're level 3. Yes. And you came to the Twilight Marshes, alone, unarmed, to rescue an A-rank scout? Yes. Juhei was silent for a moment. Then she did something Ethan didn't expect. She laughed, short, sharp, a single sound, more like an exhalation than a laugh. You're either a genius or an idiot. More like the latter. Ethan said. She looked at him. Something had changed in her eyes. Not distrust, but interest. Let's say I believe you. What's next? Ethan took out the 3rd coordinate stone, a temple in the mountains, safe territory, a barrier that hides it from detection, a place where no one will find you. Juhei took the stone. She twirled it between her fingers. And what do I get in return? Nothing. She looked at him. For a long time, nothing comes for free. Ethan shrugged. Then consider this. In return, you'll have to come and see for yourself. If you don't like it, you can leave. If you do, you'll stay. Juhei tucked the stone into her pocket. Fine, I'll take a look. But if this is a trap, I'll slit your throat in your sleep, Ethan replied bluntly. She turned and vanished into the bushes, silently, as if she'd never been there. Only the trampled grass where she'd been standing. Ethan exhaled. His hands were shaking, a dagger at his throat. He'd forgotten what it felt like. A 3rd-level body, thin skin, a sharp blade. One move, and it would all be over. All the pacts would be broken. Fenra, Lilu, and Arachne would return to the wild with full memories of him. Ethan stood up and walked home. Juhei appeared 4 days later. Not along the trail, not through the gate. She just showed up on the temple roof that morning. She was sitting on the roof ridge, dangling her feet. Ethan stepped out into the courtyard and saw her. Good morning. She looked down at him from above. Not a bad spot. The world boss in the parking lot, a demoness in the kitchen, 14,000 spiders on the hillside, and a healer blowing bubbles in the courtyard. You're a strange one, Ethan won. Thanks, Ethan said. Come on down, breakfast. She jumped off the roof. She landed softly, silently. She looked at Lila, who had come out of the kitchen with a bowl of soup, at Fenru, who had looked up, at Arachne, who, in human form, was weaving a web on the wall, at Soyeon, who was practicing her defensive spheres, at Mina, who was cleaning her sword on the steps. Juhi looked everyone over. Then she turned to Ethan. "All right, I'll stay, but I'm sleeping on the roof." Ethan nodded. "Whatever you want, I'll get you a blanket." She looked at him as if he were crazy. "I'm a scout. I don't use blankets." That night, Ethan climbed onto the roof. Juhi was lying on her back, looking at the stars. He placed a rolled-up moss blanket next to her, the prickly one. Lilu had made a second one. It turned out she knew how to sew. A little. Juhi looked at the blanket. "I told you I don't use them." Ethan shrugged. It's just lying here. Not for you. For the roof. It's cold on the roof." He went back down. In the morning, the blanket was unfolded and neatly folded, but you could see the imprint of a body on it. Ethan smiled and said nothing. Now there were 6 of them, 3 creatures, 3 humans. Ethan sat down in the main hall and unfolded the map of Argvel. On it, he marked a spot with a red circle, regional tournament, in 6 weeks. The first official competition between guilds, open registration. Any team of 5 members, 10,000 gold, an amount an average hunter would save up for a month, an amount a top guild would spend on lunch. Ethan had 3 copper coins. He sat on the steps of the temple and thought. Mina sat next to him, cleaning her sword. She listened to his muttering and remained silent. Then she said, "I have 2,000. I saved it up over 3 years at Iron Vow." Ethan looked at her. Mina shrugged. "My contribution." So Jan approached and quietly said she had 400. That's all she had. Juhi shouted from the roof that the scouts had no money because the government paid in ranking points, not gold. 3,400 out of 10. Ethan rubbed the bridge of his nose. Arachne, in human form, walked over and sat down beside him. She said that over 1,000 years, loot had accumulated in the dead forest from the hunters she had killed. Weapons, armor, rings. She didn't know how much it was worth, but a lot. The problem was that selling loot from a world boss meant giving herself away. Every item from Arachne's lair had a unique mark. Any appraiser would recognize its origin. Within an hour, the global chat would figure out who was selling it. Ethan rejected the idea. Too risky. He needed another way, the tactics library. Ethan opened the interface and began searching. In his past life, he knew dozens of ways to make money that ordinary players didn't use because they didn't know about them. Hidden quests, secret NPCs, rare resources in places everyone passed right by. And he found it. Quiet silver ore, a rare resource. The mining spot was a 3-hour walk from Upper Peak. A small cave on the riverbank that, in his previous life, had been discovered after 8 months. Quiet silver ore was worth 500 gold per unit. A blacksmith was needed to process it. Ethan looked at the temple, a workshop with an anvil, empty, waiting for a master blacksmith. He didn't have a blacksmith, but he had Arachne, a world-class web that could create and destroy at the molecular level. Arachne, can you process the ore with your web? Arachne tilted her head. Child, I can weave from anything, stone, metal, bone, light, whatever you need. Ethan smiled. The next day, he, Mina, and Juhi went to the cave. Juhi scouted the approaches. Clear, not a single player within a 5-kilometer radius. Mina stood guard. Ethan mined the ore. The work was hard. The ore was embedded deep in the rock. His 3rd-level body protested after every blow with the pickaxe he'd found in the temple's workshop, but by evening he had 12 units of ore, worth 6,000 gold at market price. Arachne processed the ore overnight. Cobweb-like threads wrapped around each piece. They heated it. They purified it. Shaped. By morning, the 12 rough stones had turned into 12 perfect silver ingots with a lunar sheen. Ethan took the ingots and went to the City of Dawn. The market square, the auction house. He listed the ingots anonymously, using a system that didn't reveal the seller's name. The first ingot went for 600, the second for 700. By the fifth ingot, buyers began bidding against each other. The price skyrocketed, a rare resource. No one knew where it came from. The global chat buzzed. Who had found quiet silver? Where? How? Ethan sold all 12 for 9,200 gold. He added Mina's and Soyan's money. It came to 11,600, more than enough. He approached the registration crystal in the town square, a large blue crystal on a pedestal. Players were crowding. Guilds were registering one after another. Ethan placed his hand on the crystal. System window. Guild registration. Name. The Quiet Court, Guildmaster. Ethan Wan, level 5. Class, hidden. Ethan entered the members' names one by one. Fenra, heir to Grimwolf, level 90, world class. Lilu Weir, demoness of the Crimson
Blade, level 22, world class. Arachne, queen of spiders, level 38, world class. Soyeon Han, healer priestess, level 16, rank B. Mina Fletcher, swordswoman, level 31. Rank S. Ju-hee, so scout, level 29.
Rank A. The system crystal flashed. Confirmation. Payment, 10,000 gold. Accepted. Pause. A long pause. Registration usually took a second. This one lasted 10. System message. Warning. The guild roster contains 3 world-class beings. This configuration is unprecedented. Confirm registration. Ethan pressed yes. System announcement. Global. To all players on the server. A new guild has been registered. The Quiet Court. Guildmaster Ethan V. on. Membership 7 members. Includes 3 world-class creatures. The global chat exploded. Literally, the chat server crashed for 12 seconds due to the volume of messages. When it came back online, the first messages were all the same. 6 weeks until the tournament turned into 4, then into 2. Ethan didn't waste a single day. The morning began with training, not his own, but his team's. So Jan had mastered defensive spheres to a consistent level. Ethan showed her 3 more techniques from the tactics library: mass healing, reflection shield, and poison purification. Each was considered A rank. Each was accessible to a B rank priestess if she knew the correct sequence. So Jan absorbed the knowledge like a sponge. Within 2 weeks, she would be healing faster than any healer Ethan had seen in his past life. Mina trained with Lilu, a human swordswoman against a demon swordswoman. The first sparring match ended in 4 seconds. Lilu knocked the sword out of Mina's hands with a single move. Mina picked up her sword. She assumed her stance again. The second sparring session lasted 6 seconds, the third 8. By the end of the first week, Mina was holding her own for 40 seconds. By the end of the second, 2 minutes. After each sparring session, Lilu silently pointed out her mistakes: wrist movement, foot angle, body balance. Mina listened, nodded, and repeated the instructions. No complaints, no questions. Military discipline. After the 3rd day of sparring, Lilu told Ethan that Mina was one of the best swordswomen she'd seen in 400 years. Ethan nodded. I know. Ju-hee trained on her own. But she let Arachne improve her equipment. Arachne's web thread was stronger than steel and lighter than silk. Arachne wove a new cloak for Ju-hee, black, lightweight, almost invisible in the shadows, with the ability to muffle sound when moving. Ju-hee put it on and vanished, literally. Even Ethan, with his tactics library, lost track of her for 3 seconds. She appeared behind him and snapped her fingers against his temple. Not a bad cloak, she said. Fenra spent his days on the grounds. He slept. He ate the reindeer that Mina and Ju-hee brought back from the hunt. He gazed at the sky. It seemed as though he was doing nothing, but Ethan could sense it through resonance. Fenra was building up his power. His level was slowly rising. 90, 91, 92. Reverse experience worked both ways. While Ethan was training the team, his subordinates were also getting their share, albeit a small one. But the crumbs from a world boss were mountains for anyone else. By the start of the tournament, Fenra was level 93, a creature capable of freezing a river with a single breath. Ethan knew this was overkill. The regional tournament was a minor event. The participants' maximum level hovered between 25 and 30. The world's top players were at levels 35 to 40. Pitting Fenra against them was like using a cannon to shoot sparrows. But that was exactly what Ethan wanted, not victory. A statement. The world had to see it. A week before the tournament, Ethan went down to the City of Dawn and submitted his application to participate. The Quiet Courtyard Guild. Tournament roster, 5 out of 7 participants. Ethan Wan, Guild Master, level 7. Mina Fletcher, Swordswoman, level 33. Juhee So, Pathfinder, level 31. So Yan Han, Healer, level 18, and 1 subordinate. Now, Ethan thought long and hard about who to field. Fenra was the obvious choice, but Ethan chose someone else. Lila Weir, level 22. The registration clerk looked at the application, then at Ethan. Are you sure your team's average level is below the minimum recommended? Ethan nodded. I'm sure. The clerk shrugged. He registered the entry and wished him luck. In the tone one uses to wish luck to someone heading in the wrong direction, the tournament took place at the First Peak Arena, a massive stone amphitheater hewn into the rock, 10,000 seats, a live broadcast to the whole world. Commentators, cameras, sponsors, top guilds in the front rows, Kaiser Lee in the VIP box. Ethan led the team to the arena entrance on the morning of the tournament. Mina walked ahead, back straight, sword on her back, a new sword, not the broken one. This one Arachne had woven from spider webs and silent silver. Light, durable, with a balance personally tailored to Mina's fighting style. Mina stood there for 2 minutes, staring at the blade when she received it. She couldn't bring herself to pick it up. Ethan waited. She took it, gripped the hilt, looked at him. She didn't say a word, but her eyes said it all. Juhee walked in Arachne's new cloak. Her hood was up, her face was hidden. She looked like a shadow with legs. So Yan was walking with a new staff. Ethan had asked Arachne to weave a base for her out of spider silk. Lightweight, flexible, with shock absorption to dampen magical recoil. For the first time, So Yan returned from training without back pain. She hugged the staff and almost cried. Lila walked beside Ethan. Her hood was up. Her horns were hidden. Scarlet eyes peered out from under her bangs. A sword was strapped to her back. Ethan brought up the rear. Level 7, unarmed, wearing a plain black hoodie. The receptionist at the entrance looked at them, then at the list. Quiet Courtyard, average, team level, 22. Sympathy flashed across his face. Their first opponent in the bracket, the Steel Hammer team. Average level, 28. 5 fighters, all swordsmen and mages. A standard combat group. Their second opponent, if they won, Red Whirlwind. Average level, 31. Specialization, speed, and control. Third, if they made it that far, Golden Dawn. Average level, 33. One of Silver Crown's affiliate teams. And in the final, the second battle went the same way. Red Whirlwind lasted 20 seconds, not because Lilu was weaker, because Ethan asked Mina to go first. Mina fought alone against 5. Her new sword, forged from spiderwebs and silent silver, sang through the air. She moved like water, a technique she'd honed in sparring sessions with Lilu over the past 2 weeks. The first opponent fell after 5 seconds, the second after 8. The third tried to flank her. Juhee appeared out of nowhere and pressed a dagger to his throat. He surrendered. The fourth cast a spell. So Yan raised a protective sphere. The spell bounced off and struck the ceiling of the barrier. The arena shook. The fifth looked at his comrades. He raised his hands. I surrender. The stands fell silent. Then they erupted in a roar. The quiet court moved on. The third match, Golden Dawn, a subsidiary team of Silver Crown. 5 fighters, average level 33, golden armor, coordinated attacks, communication via the tactical channel, professionals. Kaiser Lee watched from the VIP box. His eyes were narrowed. His fingers tapped on the armrest of his chair. He observed every battle of the quiet court. He analyzed. He calculated. A level 22 Daemoness, a level 33, Ranger level 31, Healer level 18. and a level 7 guild master who hadn't made a single move in 2 battles. He just stood there, watching, and his team did everything else. Kaiser couldn't understand it. It didn't make sense. Level 7, guild master. What kind of strategy allowed a level 7 player to command a world boss? The third battle began. Golden Dawn went on the attack in an organized manner. 2 swordsmen on the flanks, a mage in the center, an archer in the rear, a healer in reserve. Textbook, perfect execution. Ethan stood and watched. The tactics library highlighted every one of the enemy's movements. He saw the patterns. The swordsman on the left lagged slightly when turning. The mage paused for half a second between casts. The archer was nervous. His fingers trembled on the bowstring. Ethan turned to Mina, the swordsman on the left, right shoulder. Mina nodded. She lunged forward. The blow landed squarely on the weak spot. The swordsman dropped his weapon. Juhi, the archer, the bowstring. Juhi appeared behind the archer. A light touch from her dagger severed the bowstring. The archer spun around. No one there. Juhi was already 10 meters away. So-Yan, a sphere around the mage. Now, So-Yan raised her hands. A sphere flared up around the enemy mage. Not a defensive one, a restraining one. The technique Ethan had shown her 3 days ago. The mage found himself trapped in a bubble of his own spells. They bounced off the walls of the sphere and ricocheted back. The mage fell. 2 remained, the second swordsman and the healer. Ethan looked at Lila. She had been standing motionless the entire fight. Lila, she took a step. A red blade flashed. The swordsman was sent flying toward the barrier. The healer raised his hands. I surrender. The arena fell silent. Then the stands erupted. Not with laughter, with a roar. The Quiet Court wasn't just winning, they were winning with ease. Each fight was shorter than the last. Each time, the guildmaster stood in place and calmly gave orders, like a conductor. The commentator lost his voice from shouting. Kaiser Lee rose from his chair for the first time in 3 matches. The final, the Silent Courtyard versus Silver Crown's first squad. The break between matches lasted 30 minutes. Ethan gathered the team in the locker room, a small stone room beneath the arena, benches, water, silence. So-Yan sat there breathing heavily. 3 fights in a row. Her mana was at its limit. The cobweb staff took some of the strain off, but not all of it. Mina stood by the wall. Her sword was stuck in the floor. Calm, focused, not a drop of sweat. Juhi sat on the floor with her legs crossed. She twirled a dagger between her fingers. Her eyes were closed. Lilu stood in the corner. Her hood was up. Her arms were crossed. She looked at Ethan and waited. Ethan looked at them, at his team. Then he said, "The final battle will go differently. Mina, I'm going out alone." Everyone looked at him. Mina frowned. Alone, against 5 S-rank opponents. You're a 7th level fighter. Ethan nodded. I know. So-Yan opened her mouth. Ethan, this is madness. They'll kill you in a second. Ethan shook his head. They won't, because I won't fight. He turned to Lilu. You're not going out either? Lilu tilted her head. Then who is? Ethan looked up at the ceiling. Through it, he sensed a presence far beyond the arena's walls. On the upper peak plateau, a wolf the size of a bus lay gazing at the stars. Fenra, the resonance of the pact, hummed in his chest. The wolf sensed his gaze. He raised his head. It's time, asked the voice in his head. It's time. Ethan replied. The arena, 10,000 spectators, cameras, live streams. The whole world was watching. The commentator announced the final match, Silver Crown's first squad. 5 S-rank fighters. Average level 36. The best of the best. They entered the arena in golden armor, or the stands roared against them. The silent court. The stands fell silent. A single man stepped into the arena. Ethan won, level 7, unarmed, wearing a black hoodie. The commentator double-checked the list. 1 participant, level 7. He looked at the broadcast director. The director shrugged. The rules allowed it. At least 1 participant per team. Kaiser Lee leaned forward in his box. His eyes narrowed. He stared at Ethan's face. A close-up on the screen. A young face. Dark eyes. Something familiar. Something on the tip of his tongue. the commentator, announced the start. 5S, ranked Silver Crown fighters, raised their weapons. Ethan stood there. He looked at them. He recognized each one. The first swordsman, Han Ki-yoon. In his past life, he had become Kaiser's right-hand man, a good fighter, a bad person. The second, Archer Jong-mi-ra, Silver Crown's best sniper. In her past life, she died in her 6th year during a raid that Kaiser sent them on to certain death. Third, the mage, Victor Dane, an American, tough, calculating. In his past life, he rose to the rank of general in Project Halo after the collapse of Silver Crown. Fourth, Tank Oliver Gross, quiet, diligent. In his past life, he left the guild in his 3rd year. He couldn't take it anymore. Fifth, healer Pak Chin-nu, the only one Kaiser ever called by name, because without him, the guild master would have died at least 15 times. Ethan knew them all, knew their weaknesses, knew their history, knew their future, which would now never be. He raised his right hand slowly, upward from a closed palm. Ethan stood on a pedestal. Fenra sat beside him. The team stood behind him. The cameras were rolling. Live streams were broadcasting worldwide. Millions of people were watching. Ethan took off his mask. He wasn't wearing a physical mask, but all these weeks he'd been hiding behind a barrier, behind anonymity, behind the temple walls. Now the whole world could see his face, young, ordinary, the face of a guy you wouldn't notice in a crowd. Kaiser Lee stood in the hall with his guild. He looked at the screen, at Ethan's face. He didn't recognize him, but something inside him grew cold, something old and forgotten. Ethan stepped up to the microphone. He scanned the hall. His eyes found Kaiser's. He was standing in the 3rd row, golden armor, back straight, a stony face. Ethan began to speak, calmly, steadily. He said his name was Ethan Wan, that for 10 years he had served coffee to Mr. Lee, and that he was grateful, because Kaiser had taught him what kind of guild master he didn't want to be. The hall fell silent. Kaiser Lee blinked, then again. His expression changed. Not recognition, but a shadow of something, a shadow of uncertainty. Who is this man? He says he served coffee. For 10 years, there were hundreds of juniors at Silver Crown, hundreds of low-ranking members, hundreds of names that Kaiser never remembered. Ethan turned around. Behind him, Fenra rose. Kyra, who had flown to the arena 10 minutes ago and been waiting on the roof, spread her wings. Arachne, in human form, stepped out of the shadows. The cobweb threads on her back glistened in the spotlight. She placed her hand on Ethan Mina's shoulder. A sword of spiderweb and silver rested on her back. So-yeon smiled quietly, a staff in her hands. Ju-hei nodded. Her cloak of invisibility was thrown back. Her face revealed for the first time. Orcus bowed his enormous head. No, Orcus wasn't there yet. The 4th pact lay ahead, but 6 stood there. 3 creatures and 3 humans, each of whom the world had once considered a monster or expendable. Ethan looked at the camera, then at the hall, then at Kaiser Lee. He said nothing more. He turned and walked away. The team followed him. Fenra was the last to leave. His enormous tail knocked over the microphone stand, accidentally. Probably. The global chat didn't quiet down for 3 days. The quiet courtyard, Ethan Wan, the wolf, the demoness, the spider woman, a swordswoman from Iron Vow, a scout from the Korean military, a B-rank healer who crafted A-rank orbs. Who were these people? What was the silent courtyard? How did a level 7 human subdue world bosses? Questions without answers. And the most important one, what's next? Over the following months, Ethan didn't sit still. The 4th pact, Orcus, the Titansmith. He had slept for 3,000 years in the dungeon of the Stone Heart. Ethan came to him with blueprints, with ideas, with respect for the master whom the world had forgotten. Orcus awoke. He looked down at Ethan from above, 4 stories tall, stone skin, eyes like molten metal. He said that mortals usually scream when they see him. Ethan replied that he'd already seen something far more terrifying. Ju-Hai's morning face without coffee. Orcus laughed. The sound brought down half the cave's ceiling. The fifth packed the sixth. The slots opened one after another. Each trial was harder than the last. Each new subordinate required not strength, but understanding. A dragon who had lost his flock, an elemental who had forgotten his name, an ancient guardian who had watched over an empty room for 3,000 years and could not remember what had been in it. To each, Ethan brought not a sword, but a memory, a word, a name, a cup of tea. The quiet court grew. 6 months later, it was no longer a tiny team on the mountain. It was a force that governments took seriously. Kyra Dryden came in person, a half-dragon, in human form. Proud, warlike, she had heard that Ethan had subdued a dragon of her lineage and came to kill him. Instead, she sat there for 2 hours, listening as he recited the names of dragons who were no longer among the living. Every name was correct. Everyone with the right pronunciation. She asked how he knew them. He replied that he had memorized them. She asked why. He replied that someone had to remember. She stayed, not because of the pact, by choice. The World Guild tournament took place a year after the convergence. The Quiet Court, with 7 active members and a growing team of subordinates, stepped onto the world stage against guilds with hundreds and thousands of fighters. Ethan didn't field everyone. He fielded just one, not the strongest one. Orcus, a titansmith as tall as a 4-story building, stepped into the arena of the world tournament and politely asked his opponents if he could avoid destroying the arena because he just mended his apron and didn't want to get it dirty. His opponents surrendered, not out of fear, out of a realization of the sheer scale of the situation. The Quiet Courtyard won the world tournament. With 6 members against a guild of 2,000, governments lined up, offers, contracts, threats disguised as offers. Project Halo sent a polite letter with a 7-figure sum, a caveat. In case of refusal, we will consider alternative options. Ethan read the letter. He showed it to Fenray. The wolf sniffed the paper and sneezed. The paper froze and crumbled, but along with the victories and growth came what Ethan feared most of all, an anomaly. The first signs appeared a year and a half after the convergence. Players began to disappear, not dying, disappearing. Their classes were erased from the system. Their names vanished from guild rosters. Their friends forgot their faces. 2 years and 3 months after the convergence, Ethan stood before the entrance to the anomaly's core, a rift in reality. Black, pulsating, its edges glowed white. A chill emanated from it, a chill without temperature, not physical cold, emptiness, the absence of everything. Behind him stood the entire guild. 12 beings, each of whom, in a past life, had been a world boss or a hunter cast out by the world. Each had walked their own path to this place. Standing nearby were allies. Hunters from a dozen guilds, those who believed, those who saw that the silent court was not the enemy, those who understood that the anomaly would destroy everyone if it wasn't stopped. Kaiser Lee stood in the back rows. He hadn't come as an ally, as an observer. After Ethan's speech at the tournament, he had spent 3 months searching the Silver Crown archives for the name Ethan 1. He found it. A line in the Jun registry, second line debuffer, period of service, 3 years. Status, disposable. And notes, none. Kaiser read that line for 20 minutes. Then he closed the file. Then he opened it again. Disposable. He remembered that word. He'd coined it himself for people you wouldn't mind losing. He looked at Ethan standing before the rift in reality, at the man standing alongside dragons and titans. Disposable. Something inside Kaiser snapped. Quietly, deeply, he didn't apologize. He didn't approach him, but he came, and he stood there. Ethan turned to the team. He looked at each of them. Fenra, the wolf, lay to his right, huge, calm. Its icy eyes stared steadily ahead. 2 years had passed between them. 2 years of conversations on the temple grounds. 2 years of energy bars the size of his fingernail. 2 years. From the first time Fenra's wet nose touched his palm to the moment Fenra first called him not master or stranger, but friend. Lilu. The daemoness stood to his left. Her hood was off. Her horns were visible. Her crimson eyes were open. She had long since stopped hiding. She had long since stopped sleeping by the door. Now she had her own room, with a blanket, a real one, not made of moss, made of Arachne's cobweb silk. But every morning she was the first to come out and check that Ethan was there. Every morning for 2 years. Arachne, the queen of spiders in human form, a black dress, cobweb threads on her back, a calm smile. Her colony thrived on the slopes of Upper Peak. 14,000 spiders had grown to 30,000. They had entwined the entire mountain. They created a defense system that let nothing through. And every morning, Arachne would brew tea from moon sage and bring a cup to Ethan every morning for 2 years with Jan, priestess, healer, no longer B rank. A rank, the best healer on the server. Her protective spheres stopped world boss attacks. Her mass healing revived entire raids. And her back no longer hurt after battle. Mina, swordswoman, the quiet court's best blade after Lilu. Her new sword had never broken. Not a single crack. Not one. She checked it every night, ran her finger along the blade, and every night she smiled quietly, almost imperceptibly. Hey, Scout. She still slept on the roof. She still threatened to
post compromising information about everyone in the global chat. She still was the first to arrive when someone was feeling down. The moss blanket had long since been replaced with a normal one, but she kept the old one
under her pillow. Ethan knew. He didn't say anything. Kyra, Orukus, the rest. Each with their own story. Each with a name Ethan remembered. Each with a cup of tea and a conversation that changed everything. Ethan turned towards the crack. He wasn't going in alone. But he wasn't going in with everyone either. The plan was simple. The main team would hold the perimeter from the outside. The anomaly was generating distortions, waves of void that erased everything in their path. Someone had to hold them back. Lilu led the defense. Arachne spread a web around the rift. 30,000 spiders created a barrier of silvery threads. Orcus stood like a wall. Mina Juhi and Soyan took their positions. Kyra rose into the air. 2 of them went inside. Ethan and Fenra, just like on the first day. A man and a wolf. Ethan looked at Fenra. The wolf looked back at him. Fenra? Ethan asked, just as he had the first time. Just like the first time. They entered the crack. There was nothing inside. Literally nothing. Not darkness, not emptiness, absence. No top, no bottom, no walls, no floor. Only a white light with no source. And somewhere ahead, a pulsation. Rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Ethan walked forward. Fenra walked beside him. The wolf's fur had lost its luster. His level was dropping. 93, 90, 85. The anomaly was devouring his strength, sucking away his levels, wiping out his stats. Ethan could feel the resonance weakening, the connection to Lilu. A thin thread of anxiety, the connection to Arachne, a barely perceptible warmth, the connection to the others. Almost nothing. Only Fenra by his side, only the wolf. They'd been walking for an hour or a minute. Time didn't work inside the core. The pulsation was growing stronger. And finally, they saw him. Juyan Park, or what was left of him, a figure in the center of the white space. A young man, Korean, around 30, thin, in plain clothes, jeans, a t-shirt, sneakers. A programmer's outfit. He was sitting on a floor that wasn't there, his arms wrapped around his knees. Lines of code were swirling around him, millions of lines. They entered his body and exited it. He was part of the system. The system was part of him. He raised his head. His eyes were empty, white, without pupils. He looked at Ethan and spoke. His voice was quiet, hoarse, like that of a man who hadn't spoken in a very long time. He said, "There was another one. that they were coming and he was erasing them. He didn't want to, but he couldn't stop. That he was dying and the world was dying with him. That he no longer remembered his name. Ethan sat down in front of him on a floor that wasn't there. Fenra lay down beside him. His fur was dull. Level 60. Falling. Ethan looked at Juyon Park, at the creator of the world in which he had lived 2 lives, at the man who had conceived Arkvel, who had created the Monster Lord class, who had hidden an emergency exit in the code because he knew that one day someone would come, someone who would talk to the defeated rather than kill them. Ethan said, "Your name is Juyon Park. You were 29. You worked at a studio in Seoul. You created Arkfell over the course of 6 years. You died in an accident a month before the convergence, but you didn't disappear." The white eyes flinched. A spark, tiny. "You know my name." Ethan nodded. "I know your name. I know you loved the ramen from the stand on the corner near the office. I know you named Fenru after your childhood dog. I know you added the Monster Lord class to the final patch a week before you died. Because you knew someone would come. Someone who would listen." Jan Park looked at him. The lines of code around them slowed down. The pulsing grew quieter. "How do you know all this?" Ethan smiled. "Because I'm a player. I've been playing your game for 10 years. I've read every line on every forum, every interview, every patch note. I know your world better than you do. Because for you, it was a job. But for me, it was my life." Juyon Park lowered his head. His shoulders trembled. The lines of code around him flickered, faster, more chaotically. "I can't stop. I've tried. The system is devouring everything. Me, them, the whole world. I don't want to, but I can't." Ethan reached out his hand. "That's why I'm here." Juyon looked at his palm. "What are you doing?" "I'm offering a pact. You're not a monster." "I know. You're not the enemy. I know. You're just a person the world has labeled a mistake. Like everyone I've met. Like Fenru, who was considered a training boss for newbies. Like Lilu, who was called Demon Number So-and-so. Like Arachne, who was called the Mother of Darkness. Like So-Yan, who was called a disposable healer. Like Mina, who was called a sword in someone else's hand. Like Ju-Hee, who was sold like a commodity. Like me. 10 years as a disposable, 10 years as a nobody. You're not an anomaly. You are Juyon Park, and I've come to take you away." White eyes stared at him. The lines of code froze. Completely. For the first time in 2 years, the pulsation stopped. Silence. Absolute silence. Even Fenra had stopped breathing. Juyon Park reached out a hand, thin, translucent, and touched Ethan's palm. His hand was neither hot nor cold. It felt like an electric current, like code, like information taking the form of a touch. An HP bar appeared above his head. What was left of his HP, 3%, 2, 1. It wasn't dropping on its own. It was already at rock bottom. Juyon Park had been dying for 2 years, every second, without stopping. The seal of the pact. The runes flared, but not like before. Not blue. White, blindingly white. They didn't flow from one hand to the other. They filled the entire space. The white light grew brighter. 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 Ethan closed his eyes. A system message, the last one. A pact with the anomaly is impossible. The subject is not a monster. The subject is the system's creator. Recalculating parameters. Recalculation impossible. Error, error, error. Protocol cancelled. Activation of the creator's legacy. Final patch. Pause. A long pause. Pact accepted. Juyon Park, creator of Arkvel. Status stabilized. Anomaly neutralized. 2 worlds, Earth and Arkvel. Status permanent connection established. Transition between worlds accessible to all. The light went out. Ethan opened his eyes. He was lying on the grass, soft green grass. Above him was a blue sky with 2 suns. Fenra was lying nearby, his fur silver once more, his eyes an icy blue. His level was recovering. 70, 80, 90. Juyon Park was sitting nearby, not translucent, not fading away. Alive, a young man in jeans and a t-shirt, with dark eyes. With normal human eyes. He was looking at the sky. at the two suns, at the world he had created. Beautiful, he said quietly. I'd forgotten how beautiful it was. Ethan sat down. He looked around. They were in the clearing in front of the crack. The crack was gone. In its place stood an arch, a stone arch, with runes, a portal, a permanent passage between Earth and Archivell. The team stood around it. Lily was the first to run up to Ethan. She grabbed his sleeve. Her crimson eyes were wet. Demons don't cry. That was a fact that Lilu broke every time Ethan returned from places he wasn't supposed to come back from. Arachne walked. She held out a cup, moon sage tea, hot. Ethan took the cup with both hands. He took a sip. So, Jan ran up and hugged him. Tightly. The staff fell to the ground. Mina stood and watched. Then she nodded. Just once, briefly. Juhi sat on a rock and filmed everything on her phone. I'll post this in the global chat, she said. Her voice trembled. Go ahead, Ethan replied. Kyra stood to the side, with her arms crossed. She looked at the portal arch, then at Ethan. You did it. Yes. You saved the world's creator. Yes. She paused. And I didn't even have to fight. I'm disappointed. Ethan laughed. Orcus leaned forward. His enormous head was level with the temple's roof. Can I make dinner now? I've learned a new recipe. Yes, Orcus, you can make dinner. Kaiser Lee stood to the side. He looked at Ethan, at the team around him, at the creatures the world considered monsters, at the people the world considered expendable, at the 7th level guy who had just saved 2 worlds. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Then he turned and walked away. In silence, Ethan watched him go. He didn't call out to him. He didn't chase after him. He didn't say a word. Everything had been said. That evening, Ethan sat on the temple terrace, upper peak, his home. Arachne's web glistened in the starlight. Fenra lay beside him, a huge head resting on its paws. Icy eyes gazed down at the valley below. Lilu sat to his right, silently, close, her shoulder almost touched his. Arachne brought tea. She set the cup down beside him. Then she stepped back. So-Yeon had fallen asleep on the temple steps. She was hugging her staff as if it were a pillow. Mina covered her with a blanket. Then she sat down beside her and closed her eyes. She placed her sword on her lap. Even in her sleep, she stood guard. Ju-hee lay on the roof. An old moss blanket was spread out, not for warmth, for remembrance. Kyra sat on the edge of the cliff and gazed at the stars. She quietly repeated the names of dragons that were no longer there. Orcus was preparing dinner in the forge. The smell of burnt meat rose toward the sky. Somewhere below, Juyeon Park sat by the portal and looked at the world he had created, at the world that was now real forever. Ethan drank tea. He watched the 2 suns sink below the horizon. Fenra stirred. He rested his enormous head on Ethan's lap, 10 metric tons of fur and ice. Ethan's legs went numb instantly. He didn't move. Yes, the wolf said quietly. All right. Ethan placed his hand on Fenra's head. Icy fur, a wet nose, closed eyes. His friend, his first friend in 2 lifetimes. Yes, Ethan replied. All right. The 2 suns disappeared below the horizon. The stars of Archivell lit up, one by one. Down in the valley, the lights of the cities shone, people and creatures together. Ethan 1 sat on the mountain with the wolf on his lap and the demoness by his side. A cup of tea in his hand, silence all around, not empty, full. The silence of a home where everything is in its place. He took one last sip. He set the cup down on a rock. He closed his eyes. And for the first time in 2 lifetimes, he fell asleep peacefully.